welcome back to the Beyond Festival 2020, our first E-Beyond in the long history of our festival. We will start with our last panel, New Narratives for the 21st Century. And I will try to sum up also in this talk a little bit what we discussed in the last days. So I keep it with Yuval Noah Harari that humans are story-driven animals. From the day we wake up and we have our first coffee, we believe in things which have nothing to do really with reality. We believe in stories. And those stories are like religions, like cultures, like nations. They become intersubjective phenomena. If a lot of people believe in the same story, then they become a cultural reality, and sometimes those realities are more powerful than the real realities we have in our biosphere or physical phenomena. So even our economy is a story. When we stop to believe in the value of the dollar will fall into seconds into an abyss. So whatever we think is a status quo, like our economical system, it's just a story, and as long as people believe in these stories, it becomes an intersubjective reality. So when we look at the stories we are discussing at the moment, we have religions, and religions are stories of peasants and shepherds based on the Neolithical revolution when hunters and gatherers start to become farmers. The second big amount of stories we have come from the first industrial revolution, and they created those ideas of liberalism, neoliberalism, free markets, capitalism, and socialism. And they are based on the production system of the first industrial revolution, where there had been owners of machines, not of land, and they had workers they could exploit. But when we look at those theses, even I'm a visual man, I come from visual arts, so when I look, for example, at a symbol with the hammer and the sickle, we can see very clearly that in this story, we have not the thinking, we cannot explain Facebook or Google out of this theory. So we need new stories for the digital age. And what kind of stories can we see on the horizon? There's one story which I call the Silicon Valley narrative. It's a narrative where super rich people are able to change their genome, make brain computer interfaces, look for, like Ray Kurzweil, look for eternal lives. So it's an idea of becoming superhumans. Superhumans, if you have enough money, you can create something out of yourself. And this is a narrative where you have the complete freedom. If you have some billions of dollars, you can fly to Mars, or you can go into your villages under the sea and be safe. But this is a narrative which kind of decouples from all the idea of humanism. Because in this story, we are not evolved, and the activists and the children of Kenya and Nigeria, definitely not. So we have this narrative, when we simplify it, which is valuing freedom so much that there is no social responsibility involved. And this can create something which I would like to explain here as the useless class. When people who have billions can afford not only to improve themselves, they can have their artificial intelligence, their robots for the production system, a lot of people will not be needed anymore on this planet, perhaps as consumers. So when we talk about the first industrial revolution, a capitalist didn't like workers, but he needed them for exploitation. If the whole process will be automatized, work with bots and artificial intelligence, those people, they don't have even the value that you exploit them. So what kind of political power would those people have? So there's another narrative kind of building up on the horizon, and I call it the meritocracy narrative, an expert narrative. It's more or less comes from the rising forces from Asia, and it's a narrative where you use all those new techniques to build the perfect super state, where social responsibility in Asia, people would say harmony, are the most important thing, and if needed, by the cost of no personal freedom. So we have, if we kind of simplify those two tendencies, we have complete freedom with no social responsibility, and we have social responsibility with no freedom. So I wonder, since years, where is the European narrative? On our continent, we working since ages on this kind of very, very complicated equilibrium between freedom and social responsibility. So we should be able to create a new narrative where we kind of diffuse and merge over this antagonism of social responsibility and social freedom. And we can, of course, discuss for decades if we want to have a social liberalism or a social market, or if we want a liberal, not a liberation, but a liberation and emancipatory socialism. That are the tendency, but what I think we should have clear in mind that we need to fuse those two values into something which is working. There are a lot of things on the horizon which kind of put some pressure on all those things. Climate change is one thing. Another thing is that we are in a phase where evolution might completely be changed. We have the first kind of life forms here. It's life point 10, and it hardware and software evolved. When we look at bacteria or viruses, the hardware is evolved, the physical body, but also the program, how to run, how to survive, is evolved. And then we come up to a second life form, which is more or less us, and there the hardware is still evolved, but the software is designed. And this is why we go to universities, and this is why cultures differ a lot sometimes, because also that our bodies are more or less 99.999% the same. Yeah? So because we learn software, we learn when we go to school, we learn when we are in cultures, a special kind of behavior. So in our human life form, we have a completely evolved physical body, and parts of our software are evolved. And we are now on the border of a moment where life 3.0 could emerge, where hardware and software is designed. And this has a lot of relationships to what I call convergence of industry. So a lot of different things which had been separated converge now in the digital, especially about computerization and digitalization. And the next big step which we will see is the convergence of bio, nano, and infotechnology, where in the next Beyond we will make a big session out of it, because this is a very important moment when it comes to privacy and control. So, but all these convergences lead to the possibility of human enhancement or human replacement. And I know that it's a buzzword, especially in Silicon Valley. Everybody wants to have a disruptive technology. And we are disruptive enough. Yeah, so we are now confronted with disruptive forces like coronavirus or like climate events, heavy climate events. So, but a lot of those super rich people, when they are discussing the future, they are not discussing our common future. They discuss how they can survive after the thing. If it's the next nuclear war, or if it's a comet hitting the Earth, or if it's climate change, the interest is how a small group of people could survive. And we are confronted now with the AI and robot revolution, and we had been discussing in the last day a lot of AI and automatization, and where we can use it for good. And I need to say, that I'm not so much afraid of intelligence. I think intelligence should kind of confront us and kind of force us to develop. I'm much more afraid of natural stupidity. When we come to the markets, and whoever is kind of talking about new markets, there is this simple formula for if you want to build a startup and if you want to become rich. You take whatever you want, you make it intelligent, and then you have the intelligent toothbrush, the intelligent car, the intelligent chair. So whatever we know we can reinvent by adding intelligence, and intelligence like chips and algorithms become very, very cheap. So we see the AI landscape, and things that we considered a couple of years before that would be impossible for AI to do, they are already in it, like Go, and the flood is rising. So by every year, they take over another step, and we see on the top of the AI landscape is art, cinematography, book writing, science, and AI design. So as we are here at the whole Beyond Festival was started by artists, we have somehow the feeling that we are still safe, but we have to reflect that a lot. Because what I call the Einstein algorithms, in natural evolution or cultural evolution, we have some top geniuses, like Einstein, like Michelangelo, but their children and their students are, and they cannot kind of give their intelligence, pass it on. But whenever an algorithm is created, an Einstein algorithm is created, it will be copied and duplicated in seconds in thousands and millions of forms for almost zero marginal cost. So that will be the next benchmark. And all what AI is developing, or people with AI are developing, will be on top of it. So we see that there, of course, is a dynamic which is much, much quicker than biological evolution. So a couple of people said that the next step, the next kingdom on our planet will be the technium. That we are here to create something which is more intelligent than us. And we should consider that, of course, we merge more and more with our technical world. People, when they talk about that their battery in their handy is that I have no batteries. So they identify already with the tech, but it's still not completely in their body, but will merge step by step into their body. So if the machines become more intelligent, what is our task? What is our answer to that? And the first thing what I would say is changing the educational system. Our educational system is still based on telling students and pupils to give the right answers and do the right thing. And this is algorithmic. If you kind of base right tasks over each other, then you come to an algorithm. And real algorithms are always better in that. So I think art teaching could become more important than math in a tech-based future. When we are trained in our educational system to give the right answers. But I would say when you now Google or use some of those machines and algorithms, you see that you can never catch up with them. So when answers become cheap, questions become the new wealth. So our idea has to raise intelligent question. No machine can raise an intelligent or critical question. Of course, when they sell things, they can ask you, what do you want? Yeah? But they can never raise an interesting question. So Albert Einstein said, I'm neither clever nor especially gifted, I'm only very, very curious. So questions are the new wealth. And when we look at what machines are very, very bad in yet, is what in older times was called the right brain talents. And we know now that it's not really true, it's always more complex, but it gives us a hint that in our left brain we have all the logical, systematic thinking, which could be easily algorithmized. And on the left side, the right side, we have some human talents which the interesting thing is we don't know really what it is. We don't know, for example, when you now look at in a paper and you look for a job, they always want to have creative people, but we don't know really what creativity is. And this is interesting because if we would know exactly what creativity is, we could program it. Unless we are not really able to define it completely, we cannot program it, and that will be one of the big PowerPoints of humanity in the future if we do the right steps in education. The next thing is imagination. A machine can just calculate from the data it has from the past and make a prognostics into the future. But it could not imagine alternative futures. And then by imagining something really completely different, count it down to today and so be able to invent different futures. So imagination is out of control for machines. So machines do not dream, and they have no empathy, no moral, no ethics. So what we have, the days when we talked about collaborating with machine intelligence, we have to keep in mind what are the real human values we add into this machine-human calculation. I think we have to keep in mind, and that's a lot of what we talk about now when we talk about climate crisis, is with the Anthropocene, humans are the super agents. We cannot go back, and there are some beautiful ideas. If we would vanish all, or like now with the coronavirus, if we stay all home, then nature would recover. We are now so powerful on our planet that we have a huge responsibility and cannot retreat. If human would be extinct tomorrow, in the next 20 years, all the nuclear bombs and all the nuclear power plants will go off. Yeah. So we are the super agents on this, in our biosphere, and so we have to take a very, very clear responsibility for that. So when it comes to climate, it's just amazing. Everything is said, but nothing almost had been done. Yeah, I recently watched the news from a German television from '79 of the first climate conference in Geneva. And if you would take the sound, only the sound, it would be exactly the same thing people say after a climate conference nowadays. Just you saw with the images that it has been long time ago. So all the facts are long, long time on the table, but we are not yet really able to do the right things. And as we had Elizabeth today here, there are a lot of young people trying to do the right thing, and they are the hope and they are the future. So can we tackle climate change with AI? That was one of our first sessions on the first day. And there are a lot of interesting opportunities where we can use the ability of AI to gather data and to find patterns in it to use to tackle climate change. But I think one of the most interesting things we should try to do in the future is kind of train AI with the knowledge of indigenous people. They had been the shepherds, they had been taking care of the forests, of the deserts for a long time. And if you really think about what indigenous cultures are, they are gardening. They are not exploiting. So Steve Lansing brought another good idea in our panel, Designing from Emerging Futures. He said we should kind of work together, that we make a global academy of science which are giving advices to the people who want to listen and to the politicians, because they have the knowledge, they have the legitimacy, they are experts, and all the universities should send their brightest minds to such an organization, which is, I immediately remembered from native people, from indigenous people, what they call the Council of Elders. It's a group of people who have a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, but more or less no more self-interest. And so they give advice. They have no political power, but they give advice, and people know that it makes sense to listen to them. Another thing where we have to go, what could become one of those new narratives, or is kind of shaping into a new narrative is the Green New Deals. We had a discussion with people from the United States where those Green New Dealers are regarded more or less as subversive anarchists, but we have the Green New Deal also in the discussion and in the greetings of Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission. So we see that there's already a very different idea of what Green New Deal might be, for the reason I think we need a lot of new Green Deals. And one of the things which is really important, and we found out in the discussion, is that climate justice is one of the basics for any kind of Green New Deal. If we separate inequality and justice from the next step, we will fail. So what we need is a systemic approach and a shift to biosphere consciousness. And Oliver Parodi talked about human consciousness, and he said, in the pre-consciousness phase, we saw ourselves as I and the world as I. And then comes the next step in human consciousness where we say, if I am, who are you? So we see ourselves as I and the world as you. And the next shift in human consciousness was we see ourselves as I and the world as it. And when we see the world as it becomes an object. We can extract, we can exploit, we can destroy an it. It's very difficult if you see it as your other part of your I, or even if you see it as a relationship to a you, but with the it, it's easy to do what we are doing now. And he says the real idea is we cannot go back, but we can forward and go to try to develop a consciousness which has the relationship I and we. So in the last years, we brought a lot of different little ideas which could help to design a desirable future, or what I call desirable improbabilities. And one was Cradle to Cradle by William MacDonald and Michael Braungart. And this is the idea that our production process is we take something out of the nature, we make a product out of it, and then it becomes waste. And whatever is a product which becomes waste is just bad design. When we see ants on our planet, they are more than humans. They have even more, they use more energy and transform more material, but there is nothing left behind as plastic bags in the sea or nuclear waste in the dumps. So are we more stupid than ants? So there is a cycle, the cradle-to-cradle cycle is whatever you produce waste has to become food. And there is not a biological or a physical law that says this is not impossible. It's just we are not too much, we are still too stupid. For example, 2 years ago, we give the Beyond Award to Mark Post, who creates protein out of growing stem cells. And by this, and they will, I think the first burger they made, they costed 5 or 6 years ago, 250,000 euros. Last year, when he was here, they were down to 11, and they will soon go to the market. If we use cultural meat, we could stop the torture of animals. We could give 70% of the landscape back to nature and reduce climate warming at about 25%. So this is something we might want to consider. We have to change in everything, in our way of clothing. Milena Galeva told us that in her industry, in clothes designing, they produce 20% of all the climate endangering chemicals. So, but there are ideas out there. Yeah? We just have to kind of bring people together that they know those ideas. For example, Kate Ravers with the donut economy, she says, it's quite easy. There are boundaries. There's an outer boundary of the donut, and this is what our planet can provide. And there's an inner boundary of the donut where human living is worthful, what humans really need. And all our economic system, if it's not completely based on this incredible stupid idea of permanent growth, if we keep in the donut and do all our economic work, that we kind of stay in this inner little path, then we can have a very beautiful life for everybody. And there are more people out there like Jack Fresco, who made a theory of resource-based economy. It's a little bit the same thing. Is we use artificial intelligence to tell us what is there, how much clean water is there, what kind of food is there, and make a distribution system that everybody gets whatever he needs. And probably some of the Ferraris are not in the equation, but transport is in the equation, food is in the equation, clothing is in the equation. That would be no problem at all. And we had a lot of thinkers in the past which kind of pop up now as we really urgently need for some guidance, like Lynn Margulis with the idea of symbiotic Earth. She was never really highly regarded in the scientific community, but nowadays we see that more or less she was one of the founders of a systemic and symbiotic thinking, and she kind of destroyed completely this neo-Darwinistic idea that all the things had be in competition. No, the most things in nature are symbiotic. They are collaborating. And it leads us also to Lovecraft with Gaia, the Earth system. Yeah, there are theories out there which think that we are in a biosphere, in a very small, it's a very small thing, yeah, but everything is dependent on each other. And there we have now, from Peter Weibel and Bruno Latour, the exhibition at ZKM Critical Zone. And when we look at a critical zone, it's a very, very, very thin little donut around the planet from the atmosphere and what goes into the Earth, where all life happens. And it's a system which kind of is completely in a feedback emergence system. Yeah. So everything what really is important for our life is in a very, very small critical zones, and we have to become Earthlings again. We have to become terrestrials. And the funny thing is, when I read all these books and was on the conferences here, with the Critical Zone conference, it reminded me on something when I was with Gülsel at the indigenous people from the Hopi tribe. And of course, it always sounds a little bit romantic, yeah? But now we hear the same thing in clever. Yeah? But here you see Albert Einstein, he also visited the Hopi. And what the Hopi said in the early 70s and up to the 80s, and then they stopped talking because nobody really did listen. But it was very, very clear. The Earth is a living being. We, the children of all nations, have to defend her and keep the life in balance. So when we come up with designing from emerging futures, I want to explain shortly how all this event started. And it still started when we worked with mathematicians on data visualization on climate. And they have billions of data and they don't know what to do with it. And so we made visualization that you can go into the data and see that this is a very strange yellow point, and then you can look at the data, why is it like this? And after a while of work, I said, this is boring, because when we compute the data of today into the future, the only outcome could be like with the Club of Rome, we ruin our planet 2050, 2060, or 2070. So I said, let's do another thing. I help you to visualize probabilities, and you help me to count down desirable improbabilities. And he was like, well, this is what comes up when you work with artists. And I said, let's use the beyond community, the beyond tribe, to bring in the most interesting people from the planet, which would never meet, and let's discuss together what kind of world we want to have in 2050. And then we visualize this and tell your supercomputers count down. And then we know what kind of parameters we have to change at what time to reach a desirable future. So of course it is not so easy and it will not work like this, but this starts that we discuss what kind of future do we want. And politics that should be the job of politics, but they are doing it and no more. They're running from one election to the next election to the crisis. The market is also not doing it. They were just staring at the data of their money and the stakeholders, and nobody is really thinking future. So we have to jump in and do the job. So we have to imagine and simulate the future and then count it down to the present. So because today's ideas and narratives are the foundation of tomorrow's history. And I just want to go back to one of the books of when I was very young, Jules Verne, The Journey to the Moon. It was written in 1873, and I think 100 years later, people really went to the moon. And when you look at the picture, can I have the picture again? This, the picture on the right side of Jules Verne was printed in his first book, and it shows his spacecraft. And when you look at the spacecraft, it looks more or less 100% like the Apollo. And it has also these parts which are left, and then only the small part is landing on the moon. The only thing is, I don't know if you see it, that in the first part there is a chimney and smoke coming out, because in this time they could not think about other energies than steam engines. So now we could say, has he seen the future, or has he designed the future? And I believe that billions of young people have read this book and had this image already in their mind, and then there came new materials, new technologies, and then they started to build this thing, with, of course, with a new energy form, but this means how powerful stories can be. So here, in future design, artists create not only new design, but new narratives and vision for the future, creating probabilities and desirable improbabilities, and resolving the antagonism between nature and technology. Thank you.
Ludger, amazing. I wish I could have a big applause for you, but the E-Beyond, you want to sit next to me, because we have a couple of minutes left, and you already gave a sort of introduction to the panel that is left. I really love that. Maybe you remember we had 1 year Dale Harrickstedt here, one of the designers for Minority Report, and he was talking about that there were future researchers involved in the movie to visualize what would that look like, what is a motorbike looking like in a couple of years, and well, everything that are most motorized, and what you see now is almost like that, and even like everybody is relating, exactly, everybody is showing the gesturing technologies from Minority Report always to show what is possible today, and saying, hey, that was envisioned years ago. When you put together the symposium this year, there's always a reason why you put the last people last, because there is a reason for to talk about the new narratives of the 21st century, because everything leads to that. It's a story. How did you pick the people this year?
Well, I'm normally very much interested in our last panel to bring people together who normally don't talk to each other, because what we need is an interdisciplinary discussion, and not specialist events. Yeah. So I come from documentary filmmaking. If I go to a documentary film congress, I know everybody, and I know exactly what they are saying, and it's boring to hell.
It's a peer-to-peer conversation.
Yeah. So I try to find people who, I think those people I have now on this panel, they never met again before, not on Beyond and not in personal life. So I find this interesting.
So you are basically building new relations. I'm referring to something you told me yesterday in a Lakota, in the Lakota Nation language. I can't say that, but
whenever you go to a sweat lodge, or you go to the Sundance, or whenever you make a ceremony, you enter with Homitakase, and it means all my relations.
Homitakase?
Homitakase. And all my relations, normally when anthropologists translate them, they say all my relatives, because they think tribal people think only in mom, dad, and brother. But with all my relations, they mean what we now discuss with a biospheric, a symbiotic world. Yeah? You are related to everything. If the plants are hurt, it hurts your world. If the world is hurt, it hurts your world. If you are hurt, it hurts the others. So you are in a complete relationship. We always think we are outside of ourselves, but we had never been outside of something. We had been in the womb of our mother, and then we are born in another womb. We don't know what it really is, but we are always inside, and we are related to whatever happens in the 60s. We said when there's an injustice in the world, it has to matter for us, and we lost it.
But do you really think we are inside? Because most people are not consciously inside. That's what I believe. And like the technocrat world we are living in right now, and you're seeing that people are inside their phones. They're not really inside. They are not connected to themselves.
Yeah, but you see, now we are inside in ZKM. If we go outside from ZKM, we are inside of Karlsruhe. If we go outside of Karlsruhe, we are inside the region. And if we go to Mars, we're still inside. Yeah, there is no outside, no real outside. And when Oliver Parodi said this thing about consciousness, a lot of beings like plants, they have still this I relationship. Yeah, me and what is not me is the other part of me. Yeah? We came then to the I in you, and then we became to the I in it. And when I consider you as it, and not as the other part of myself or a you, if I consider you as an it, then we have a difficult relation. Then I can exploit you. Then I can treat you bad because you are an it. Yeah.
Yeah. When we are always inside, what would be your response to flat earthers?
To what?
Have you heard of flat earthers? People who believe that the earth is flat.
Yeah. I heard of people believing in an old man God with a long beard. Yeah. This is what storytelling all is about. You can tell the biggest bullshit, yeah, and we see it nowadays with Donald Trump, with Boris Yeltsin, with Bolsonaro, that people are really successful in telling complete bullshit, and it's against all what we know, it's against all facts, yeah. But of course, people can believe in flat Earth.
And then the plastic falls off to something.
Yep.
They believe it's. Who knows? Well, I think I will have a couple of questions later in the panel that you will be part of. And I just got a thumbs up that our first speaker is ready, is online waiting for us. And I was waiting for you, Thorsten Bauer. Again, I'm really sorry we can't see you, we can't hug you here. Hey, Thorsten, great.
Hello.
Yeah,
so
give me an e-hug.
Hands.
Give me an e-hug. One of my favorite people out there from the Beyond Festival, Beyond family. But for all the others, because I heard this year we have a unbelievable outreach on social media, and I want to say that again. If you want to support this festival and all the filmmakers who do amazing documentaries about the environment and about climate change, please buy a ticket for $19.90, which is just under $10 on our website, www.beyond-filmfestival.com. And then you can see over 50 of the beautiful films that have been curated here at this festival. And Thorsten, now to you, also an award-winning creative director, a media artist, an entrepreneur and curator, working in the field of spatial media installations since 2001. When I was living in Australia, I do remember that there was this Vivid Festival where they do projection mapping on a lot of buildings, but especially on the Opera of Sydney, which is amazing. So I bought those calendars for my friends to take home, and a couple of years later, I meet the person who was responsible for that. That was Thorsten and his company, Urban Screens. So I feel pleased and honored to know you. Recently, he's the curator for the Alp Philharmonie Media Wall and acts as a juror in numerous light and media art festivals. And one of the latest work as well is augmented architecture. He deals with the development of sustainable digital urban culture. His background is in music and sociology, and he performed as a musician and video artist. And to give you two more sentences about the work that he will present now, he dedicates a large part of his time to discuss and exchange ideas with specialists in different fields, and especially in the field of new media, on a really international scale. And he does that by being on symposiums and giving presentations and lecturing at schools and workshops and master classes. And obviously through publications, he is reaching a lot of people. This has enabled him to continually develop his interest in the theoretical debate in this field over the last few years and expanded his knowledge when it comes to effective but responsible digital placemaking. And through him, I also met a lot of beautiful visual artists, like for instance at the festival he's creating in Weimar, the Genius Loci. Thorsten, we are all yours.
Thank you very much for this very nice introduction, and I'm very glad Beyond is having me again in this year. Actually, as you told, quite not much, but quite on the point what I'm doing as a profession. I don't want to use actually this 10 minutes to like show up my past works, but more point out a more general idea about how I consider myself as a designer in this terms of future design, in this terms specifically of social responsibility as a designer. And I thought a lot of about that, and I don't want to, the second thing is I don't want to use this 10 minutes to speak freely, but I wrote a text and I'm going to read that statement about this topic and to you. And I switch to the text, and I don't want to lose time because it's more or less about 10 minutes, and it connects quite interestingly to what Ludger has said before. So at one point he claims we have all the technologies, right? We have so many solutions, and there are so much more solutions that are already developed or in the phase of development right now. Why don't we start to change? And this is also like the first thesis I want to start off with. It's about the human being as the bottleneck in times of change. And in my view, the most limited resource when it comes to digital change is man's ability to adapt to the shifts that occur over time. It's not technological, economic, or ecological resources that determine change, but our individual ability and the ability of society as whole to remain flexible. And the cultural integration of our rapidly changing living environment will become the major challenge of societies on Earth that we will be faced with. The correlations and coherencies that are able to find us ways of accepting new technology, products, and trends will be those that survive. It's not about attracting attention anymore, but more about producing acceptance in the near future to come. And digitalization is, of course, not a phenomenon that is confined to the IT environment alone. Digitalization affects all areas of our lives and step up the pace of progress and change in all social contexts. There's going to be so much in the way of change in the next 25 years on the labor market alone that far-reaching social dispute and debate is practically inevitable. So in a book I read entitled Retropia, which was published 2017 by the author and sociologist Zygmunt Bauman, pointedly describes the global tendency towards an overall reactionary aversion to future change that can be observed in the political spectrum in this part of the world and in the increasingly neophobic social climate. And I quote, he writes, "While we have lost our faith in utopias of all use, the human aspiration that made this vision so compelling has not died. Instead, it is re-emerging today as a vision focused on not on the future, but on the past. Not on a future to be created, but on an abandoned and undead past that we could call retropia," quote. If we do, and I think if we do not succeed in counteracting this retropic climate, we will find ourselves heading for a backlash against technologies, the inevitable consequence of which would be a huge social divide and the emergence of a neoconservative digital precariat class of people. Nation state thinking and right-wing populist ideologies will gain ground to an unprecedented degree. We need to acknowledge, we as designers then need to acknowledge that we have a substantial contribution towards providing continuous contexts that are rendered available and accessible for society as a whole through our design work. Every design we create involves us working on principles that lend us new expertise when working in this world of increasingly complexity and change. Simply transferring old design principles to the completely new communication or general task is it's not only inadequate, but also negligent and careless. And in this context, I want to put a second quote. A German philosopher, Peter Sloterdijk, you may know him at Beyond Festival, reveals a kind of remarkable point in his essay entitled On the Birth of Design and from the Spirit of Ritual. He describes design as a bridge that frees us from the feeling of helplessness we sense when dealing with complex, advanced technologies or general complexity. And that this has all its origin in the ethnological expression of a ritual. And I quote here, assuming that the flood falls down from the sky with thunder and lightning on your roof of leaves, if you can survive the storm at all, you can survive it better if you chant a song for the weather god. It's not important to be able to make weather yourself, but it's important to know a technique for keeping fit in bad weather. Only someone who knows what to do when there is nothing to be done knows enough efficient and continuing games of life to prevent him or herself collapsing in panic or freezing into immobility. And in another part of the essay, he specifically goes to the responsibility of designers then. For design, seen from an ecological perspective of competence, design is nothing but the competent liquidation of incompetence. It secures the individual's competence limits by providing the subject with processes and gestures for navigating as an expert in the ocean of incompetence. Interesting idea. So this interpretation of the design task initially frees us from the claim that we as designer can immediately change anything about the shortcomings of our world through design. But that said, it places yet another kind of responsibility on us. As designers, we are the ones who can save people from sinking into a feeling of anxiety and insecurity. Against the backdrop of a constantly changing world, this responsibility will be of central importance. Even if we do not provide any direct answers, it's still our job to build the bridges in order to help people overcome being socially paralyzed by shock that is driven by fear and mental overload. Design, therefore, plays a central role when it is a case of macro-social values and political orientation. When people find themselves in a desperate situation that leaves them powerless to respond or act, they will inevitably develop radical tendencies. So, to refer to Sloterdijk in the very end of my statement here again, as creative minds, we are the medicine men who invent the narrative through which the coherency of the world can be restored. The gap through which helplessness, panic, and mental overload penetrate our lives has been closed from time immemorial by rituals. In this case, we also, as designer, act as creator of rituals and design circle dances that enable us to correlate with a hyperdynamic world. even if we cannot really change anything in the crazy of the world we live in, let us at least compose a song about it, and in the hope that the world and the people in the world will sing along with us. That was my statement referring to that point of social responsibility of designer, and maybe a little bit more. Obviously, it's not only the designers, and my definition of designers is quite broad here. It's quite wide. So it includes, I think, all creative minds, all out there, all people out there who are working on new technology, new aesthetics, new dramaturgy, and all creative substances. So yes, but I think that this flexibility in ourselves, and it starts really not with like the group or the outer world. It starts with the inner world in yourself, to stay flexible in this complexity. And I call this like sitting in the fire, in a way, like to stay still and sit in the fire within a world that is getting where you lose any overview, and it's getting more and more complex. Yeah, thank you. Are you there?
Yes.
Kathleen?
I am. And there's a big applause of, I know, yesterday it was 700 people on our webpage, so you have 700 people imagining now, giving you a big applause. And they will be back with the panel discussion where you will be part of. Thank you, Torsten,
Thank you very much.
for those insights. I would switch now to our next speaker, who is part of this panel, and I addressed that already in the morning session, that we will now have a director of Fraunhofer Institute with us, Professor Dr. Marion Weißenberger-Eibel. She sent us a video in advance, and Ludger is here to help me to start that. But let me introduce her as the director of the Fraunhofer Institute for System and Innovation Research, the ISI. And she has a full professorship for innovation and technology management at the Institute for Entrepreneurship, Technology Management and Innovation here in Karlsruhe at the KIT. And I will switch to German now, just to give our artificial intelligence algorithm something to do, and she will have a presentation in German. So I will tell you the rest about her in German now. Professor Marion Weißenberger-Eibel wird uns ihre Präsentation geben zum Thema Szenarien und neue Narrative zur Zukunftsgestaltung. Und warum ist sie jemand, der das besonders gut rüberbringen kann? Ich habe schon gesagt, sie ist Institutsleiterin von einem der Fraunhofer-Institute. Nun muss man dazu wissen, es gibt 75 Fraunhofer-Institute und jedes hat einen Direktor oder einen Institutsleiter. Und sie ist eine von 4 Frauen, die es in dieser Welt geschafft haben. Und natürlich, wie jeder Leiter eines Fraunhofer-Instituts oder Leiterin, ist sie bestückt mit vielen Preisen, ausgezeichnet, eine hochdotierte Wissenschaftlerin zum Beispiel von der Akatech, die allen Wissenschaftlern, zumindest in den Ingenieursbereichen, gut bekannt ist. Aber ich möchte herausstellen, was nicht viele Fraunhofer-Institutsleiter haben, ist die Auszeichnung, unter den relevantesten deutschen Persönlichkeiten zu sein und hier besonders Top 100 der erfolgreichsten Frauen der deutschen Wirtschaft. Und denn ihr Institut und das KIT, ihr Lehrstuhl, arbeiten extrem viel mit und für Unternehmen in Deutschland. Sie wird uns dazu mehr erzählen. Aber ich möchte auch noch mal herausstellen, weil ich vorhin den tollen Aufkleber gezeigt habe von Arts Plus, Culture Reaches Where Politics Never Reach, Culture and Arts. Frau Weißenberger-Eibel gehört nämlich zu den Frauen, die auch in der Politik sehr aktiv sind. Und hier ist sie geschätzte Expertin. Sie begleitet 2011/12 den Expertendialog der Bundeskanzlerin, wo sie die Arbeitsgruppe Innovationskultur leitet und die Kanzlerin zur künftigen Gestaltung von Wirtschaft und Gesellschaft in Deutschland berät. Im nachfolgenden internationalen Deutschlandforum, einem Format für den interdisziplinären Austausch über weltweit relevante Zukunftsfragen, moderierte sie bereits 2015 die Themengruppe Die Zukunft braucht ganzheitliche Lösungen. Bitte das Video ab von Frau Professor Weißenberger-Eibel.
Eines der großen Themen unserer Zeit ist der Klimawandel. Oftmals erkenne ich in der Diskussion zwei Haltungen. Die einen verspüren ein Gefühl der Ohnmacht und Ausweglosigkeit. Die anderen verschleiern eher die Realität und fragen sich, warum sie gerade jetzt für die Zukunft des Planeten etwas tun sollten. Beide Haltungen bringen uns nicht weiter. Mit einem neuen faktenbasierten Narrativ können wir jedoch entgegenwirken. Für eine wünschenswerte und realistische Zukunft sollten die Narrative des 21. Jahrhunderts neue Potenziale erschließen und alternative Formen wählen. Wie also kann eine Auseinandersetzung mit dem Klimawandel aussehen, die alle verstehen und zum Handeln anregt? Dazu, meine Damen und Herren, hilft der Blick in die Wissenschaft und Zukunft, in die sogenannte Zukunftsforschung. Ziel der modernen Zukunftsforschung ist es, Trends zu analysieren und Szenarien zu entwickeln. Und auf dieser Basis können wir strategisch bessere Entscheidungen treffen. Die Zukunft können wir nicht vorhersagen. Nein. Aber wir können gemeinsam und systematisch nach vorne schauen und uns wertvolles Orientierungswissen erarbeiten. Und dieses Wissen hilft uns für morgen besser zu planen. Zukunftsforschung geht aber noch einen Schritt weiter. Sie fragt nicht nur danach, wie die Welt in 20 bis 30 Jahren aussehen könnte, sondern in welcher Welt wir in 20 bis 30 Jahren leben wollen. In Zeiten der Corona-Pandemie ist die Frage nach einem Leben in der Zukunft präsenter als je zuvor. Und die Transformationsforschung zeigt uns, dass sich neue Narrative in Krisen eher durchsetzen als in ruhigen Zeiten. Die Corona-Krise und die veränderten Rahmenbedingungen sollten wir daher zum Anlass nehmen, die Zukunft erstens neu zu denken, zweitens nachhaltig auszurichten und faktenbasiert erzählerisch zu gestalten. Dabei können und sollten wir uns auch unsere Werte und Emotionen einbringen. Solidarität, Achtsamkeit, Gemeinsinn und Gemeinwohl gehören meines Erachtens dazu. Sicherlich stellen Sie sich jetzt die Frage, wie können wir solche sinnstiftenden Auseinandersetzungen entwickeln? Ganz einfach, mit den Methoden der modernen Zukunftsforschung. Das Repertoire der Zukunftsforschung ist vielfältig, von unterschiedlichen Kreativitätstechniken über statistische Analysen und Bewertungsverfahren bis hin zu computergestützten Echtzeitsimulationen. Auf der Metaebene lassen sich viele Ansätze und Techniken in 3 Phasen einteilen: Visioning, Szenarien und Roadmapping. Beim Visioning stellen wir uns die Frage, welche Zukünfte sind überhaupt denkbar und wohin wollen wir? Um diese Frage zu beantworten, sind vor allem Kreativitätstechniken wie ein strukturiertes Brainstorming oder auch Zeitreisen hilfreich. Man beginnt mit einem weißen Blatt Papier und nutzt die Vorstellungskraft einer ganzen Gruppe, um erste Ideen, Bilder und Visionen zu skizzieren. Und mit diesen bildhaften Erzählungen können wir uns mögliche Zukünfte vorstellen. Die Szenariotechnik ist das wohl bekannteste Verfahren der Zukunftsforschung. Mit Szenarien werden multiple Zukünfte konstruiert, die über einzelne Technologien hinaus ein gesellschaftliches Narrativ entwickeln. Denn in der Entwicklung von Zukunftsszenarien stellen wir uns die Leitfrage, welche Zukünfte sind grundsätzlich möglich? Diese Szenarien bündeln nicht nur Hypothesen über Dynamiken und Entwicklungen, sie bündeln auch Trends einer zukünftigen Gegenwart in Form von Erzählungen. Und schließlich stellen wir uns beim Roadmapping die Leitfrage, welche Zukünfte sind durch welche Maßnahmen und Projekte wann erreichbar. Eine Roadmap hilft dabei, langfristige Ziele in einzelne machbare Schritte zu strukturieren. Die Roadmap ist daher vergleichbar mit einem Fahrplan, der uns Wege in eine erfolgreiche Zukunft aufzeigt, Wege, die es zu kommunizieren gilt. Auch der Weg zu mehr Nachhaltigkeit braucht positive Zukunftsvisionen. Nehmen wir das Beispiel Geoengineering. Beim Geoengineering geht es um zielgerichtete technologische Eingriffe in das Klimasystem. Und Ziel ist es, der vom Menschen gemachten Klimaerwärmung entgegenzuwirken. So können beispielsweise Pumpen im Meer einen Wasseraustausch zwischen der Tiefe und der Oberfläche bewirken. So können mehr Nährstoffe für CO2-bindende Algen an die Oberfläche gelangen. Gerade im Bereich der Klimaforschung ist ein neuer Fortschrittsoptimismus zu beobachten. Wissenschaftlerinnen und Wissenschaftler sind der Auffassung, dass technologische Innovationen entscheidend sind, um unsere großen Herausforderungen zu bewältigen. Jedoch sollten wir uns bewusst sein, dass Geoengineering kein Allheilmittel für unser Klima ist. Denn gerade der Einsatz von aussichtsreichen Technologien birgt die Gefahr, dass wir uns zu sehr nur auf Technologie vertrauen. Technologiegläubigkeit ist eine große Gefahr. Und daher möchte ich nun auf das Narrativ des technologischen Determinismus eingehen. Der technologische Determinismus denkt Veränderung wie auch Nachhaltigkeit von existierenden Technologien aus. Mensch und Maschine müssen kooperieren. Diese Aussage haben Sie sicherlich auch schon mehrfach gehört. Technodeterministen glauben daran, dass Technologie die Grundlage menschlicher Aktivitäten bildet. Oft ist dieser Glaube damit verknüpft, dass die Entwicklung und der Einsatz von Technologie eine inhärente Logik oder einem vorbestimmten Pfad folgen. Und das, meine Damen und Herren, ist nicht der Fall. Mensch und Maschine sind nicht zwei separate Einheiten, sie bedingen einander. Hier können wir ansetzen und das Narrativ neu gestalten. Und dazu müssen wir einen Schritt zurückgehen. Denn wir brauchen eine Kommunikation, das nicht nur über die Konsequenzen einer Technologie nachdenkt, wir brauchen auch ein Narrativ über den sozialen Ursprung der Technologie und die Frage, wie Technologien eigentlich entstehen. Wir dürfen nicht mehr zulassen, dass ein Narrativ zu Technologiegläubigkeit oder Technologieskepsis führt. Die Narrative der Zukunft sollen erzählen, dass immer der Mensch vor der Technologie steht und niemals die Technologie vor dem Menschen. Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, wir haben alle es also in der Hand, die Narrative der Zukunft zu gestalten. Denn wir stehen immer, auch am Anfang einer Erzählung. Und dazu braucht es dreierlei. Unseren Mut, die Herausforderungen und Probleme unserer Zeit zu erkennen, unseren Willen, diese anzugehen und zu lösen und drittens, unsere Kraft, Zukunftsbilder und Szenarien zu formulieren. Für ein nachhaltiges Leben auf unserem Planeten müssen wir daher gemeinsam anpacken. Vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
Vielen Dank für dieses Video und diese Präsentation, wo wir später nochmal eingehen werden im Panel, zu der ich auch einige Fragen für Frau Professor Dr. Weißenberger-Eibel habe. I will switch back to English. Our artificial intelligence algorithm that was developed by the KIT that is doing our live translation. I hope that did a good job, but now we go back to English, and maybe for the others who don't speak English, now you can see online the translation of the algorithm from English to German. Let's continue with Dr. Markus Schmidt. He's the founder and team lead of the Biofaction, or Biofaction KG, a research, technology assessment and art science company in Vienna, Austria. With his background in electrical engineering, biology and environmental risk assessment, his career goes back a long way. He carried out several research projects, for example, the SynBioSafe. Well, in the scientific world, you have to understand that acronyms are the thing. The first European project on safety and ethics of synthetic biology, and that was in 2007. He produced science policy reports for the Office of Technology Assessment at the German Bundestag, which was on GM crops in China, and the Austrian Ministry of Transport, Innovation and Technology, where he also produced some reports. He served as an advisor to the European Group on Ethics of the European Commission and the US Presidential Commission for the Studies of Bioethic Issues. And many more, as I always have to stick to the time. I'd say in addition to his scientific work, he engaged in the collaboration between art and science, e.g., for example, producing the Biofiction Science Art Film Festival series from 2011 to 2014. I'd say we give the time to our speaker, Markus Schmidt, and I believe I have a thumbs up that he's there. Markus, I think we still need sound.
As you
We see
probably all know,
yes.
The ecological footprint, that is, the resources humans need, has long surpassed the biocapacity, that is, the ability of the Earth to produce these resources. And if we look at the ecological footprint versus the Human Development Index, we can clearly see a pattern. So the better off people are in a country in terms of life expectancy, health, education, women's rights, etc., the higher the ecological footprint. It turns out that there is practically no place in the world where there is at the same time an acceptable level of human development and an ecological footprint that is within the planetary boundaries. Or in simple words, we don't know how to live well and not mess the environment. So global environmental challenges, just climate change or biodiversity decline, are caused by a complex interplay of socioeconomic, behavioral, political, and techno-scientific factors. And these interwoven dependencies allow not only for a number of different analytical approaches, but also a wide variety of proposed solutions. Some of these solutions tend to focus more on the economic factors, such as, for example, the role of capitalism and the resulting exploitation of natural resources, and appropriate incentive structures to find innovative solutions. Others highlight socio-political factors, for example, global rules to assign pollution rights, such as seen in the negotiations on CO2 emissions, or use different levels of coercion, from voluntary to mandatory, to reduce the environmental footprint in one or the other way. Others, on the other hand, rely on, let's say, more or less ingenious, novel techno-scientific solutions to curb the pressure on the environment. And let's take a look at one case study here at geoengineering and how proposed solutions to the problem are framed in public debates. Some expect that only a free society, an open democracy, with enough incentive structures available, such as in capitalism, will be able to innovate itself out of the dilemma and find technical solutions. Here you can see 4 examples to reduce global warming. On the top left, it's called ICE 911. It involves spreading silicon beads on the Arctic ice to increase sunlight reflection. Okay. The second, on the lower left, it aims to tackle iron deficiency in the oceans to stimulate algae growth. It means that iron is a limited element in the oceans, and by adding iron powder in great numbers, you would have more algae growing and they would consume more CO2. The third plan presented here is seen on the top right. It's called Stratospheric Controlled Perturbation Experiment, and pretty much the aim is to create clouds in the stratosphere to reflect sunlight into space. And the fourth, on the lower right hand side, it summarizes different attempts to put CO2 back into the earth. Technically, this is called carbon capture and storage. The opposite side of the solution spectrum assumes that since free techno-capitalism has caused the problems in the first place, only a very different approach could get us out of it, including well-designed and executed behavioral changes by either a strong government or a strong civil society. And here you can see the manifesto against geoengineering that pretty much sums up this point of view. It means that what they want to say is that no technical innovation whatsoever would be permitted or would be seen as feasible to solve the problem, and only a socio-political change could do it. I think hence the name manifesto. As you can see here are the main arguments against geoengineering, and most of them actually don't tackle the technical solutions from a scientific point of view, but rather they take a moral or ethical stance against it. The other case I'd like to talk about is biodiversity loss, and here we see a similar division in the approach to solve the issue. Biodiversity loss is known for quite some time. It's the loss of species, of all kinds of species, plants, animals. And several studies have identified the causes of biodiversity decline. And the big culprits, so to say, are overexploitation, for example, logging, forests, or hunting, but also agricultural activities, for example, crop production or livestock farming. This clearly has changed the surface of the earth quite dramatically. But also urban development, simply like constructing houses and destroying natural lands. And who is responsible for all that? Exactly. It's us, it's humans that demand ever more resources and thus put pressure on biodiversity. Since the world population is expected to grow at least until 2100, this is not so good news for the remaining species in the wild. So how can this problem be solved? And again, we have different approaches. Here's one that's quite radical, I would say. Instead of finding any technical solution to reduce logging or increase crop production, some propose to reduce or eliminate altogether the number of children people should have. Clearly, this is a very rational approach, but it kind of literally throws out the baby with the bathwater. The more technical proposals to overcome or deal with extinction of species is to synthesize them in the lab with the help of synthetic biology. For example, the DNA of an elephant could be genetically edited or modified to the point that it resembles the DNA of a mammoth. And then you would just have to find an elephant a female elephant and implant this modified egg so a mammoth will be born. Will this solve the problems of biodiversity decline? Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to go into the pros and cons of each argument, but from a bird's eye view, what can be seen is a clear divide in how to approach these global environmental problems. Okay? And on the one side, we see that people continue to work in a framework that has been successful in the past, that brought us all the goods of modern society, and just the idea is to continue in this mode, in this approach, and to just find new solutions, predominantly technical solutions to deal with this problem. And the other approach is to say, well, no, because this is the mindset that brought us into this situation in the first place. We clearly need to tackle this problem with a different approach, and kind of we check this idea to find yet another technical solution. And the question here is simply, is it possible to go beyond this divide and realign the conflicting positions in favor of a responsible innovation approach that takes into account social, economic, and technical aspects alike? So can we find a way to integrate at the same time a different way to approach things, but still use the ingenuity of scientific and technological means to help us come up with a problem? So I would really like to discuss this with the audience over Zoom. I hope this is possible later on, and we really like to hear what you think about it. Thank you.
Thank you. I would love to jump to our last speaker before we go into the panel discussion. And I see that he's already online. Jason Edward Lewis. He's a digital media poet, artist, and software engineer or software designer. He founded OBX Laboratories for Experimental Media, where he directs research and creation projects exploring computation as a creative and cultural material. Along with the artist Scavinati, I hope that was correctly pronounced, he co-directs Aboriginal territories in cyberspace, workshops on Aboriginal storytelling and video game design, and the Initiative for Indigenous Futures. Luis is deeply committed to developing intriguous new forms of expressions by working on conceptual, critical, creative, and technical levels simultaneously. So he is a University Research Chair in Computational Media and the Indigenous Future Imaginary, as well as Professor of Computation Arts at Concordia University in Montreal. Born and raised in California, he is Hawaiian and Samoan, or however you call it, Samoan. Please welcome Luis. Jason Edward Lewis. Hi. And we need the sound. Sorry. Hi, Jason. Wait a second. Now we have you.
There we go. Classic Zoom mistake. Good morning. Thank you for the introduction. I appreciate it. And I wanted to thank Ludger for inviting me to speak with you all today. Before I get started in my talk, I want to comment a little bit on Ludger's opening framing of the panel. Let me just share my screen here. Here we go. Okay, so I just wanted to, sorry, not sure. Yay, Zoom fun. I just wanted to talk about just a comment before I get going about Ludger's observation about Indigenous people being gardeners. And I wanted to say that, yes, Indigenous people were and are great gardeners, but also great architects, politicians, economists, scientists, mathematicians, engineers, artists, and philosophers. It's just that our philosophies tended to stay grounded in the reality of living well with our relations. So Before I start, I want to emphasize that I'm speaking for myself this morning as an individual artist and researcher. I don't represent all Indigenous people, nor even all Hawaiians or Samoans. I'm here to present a viewpoint, not represent the viewpoint. So the title of this short presentation is AI as Relation. And it's going to touch on a couple things that some of the speakers previously also touched upon. This comes from an initiative in which I've been involved for the last 3 years to articulate Indigenous views on artificial intelligence and other advanced computational systems. The initiative is called Indigenous Protocol and Artificial Intelligence Workshops. The Indigenous Protocol and Artificial Intelligence Workshops grew in part out of an essay I wrote with several colleagues called Making Kin with the Machines. In that essay, we argue for moving away from the anthropocentric views of how to design and develop AI technology and towards a design approach based on Indigenous concepts of the relationships between humans and non-humans, writing that, quote, Indigenous epistemologies are much better at respectfully accommodating the non-human. We retain a sense of community that is not racially defined but articulated through complex kin networks anchored in specific territories, genealogies, and protocols. Ultimately, our goal is that we as a species figure out how to treat these new non-human kin respectfully and reciprocally, and not as tools, slaves to their creators. So my co-authors and I wanted to think through what it means to begin designing AI from a different starting point, one where man is neither height nor center of creation, one that can understand that the human and the non-human and the things are nodes in a web of relationships that requires us to value reciprocity amongst those nodes as highly as efficiency or profit. Probably higher than profit, certainly. To borrow language from Stephanie Betts's talk yesterday, to imagine relationality as a first-class citizen of our software design when creating AI systems. So the Making Kin with Machines essay inspired my co-authors and I to invite conversations, to initiate conversations to pull together a larger, more diverse group of mainly Indigenous folks to discuss these ideas further. This is how the workshops came about. So workshop participants came from across Aotearoa, Australia, North America, and the Pacific. They are Anishinaabe, Barada, Cree, Crow, Cheyenne, Coqui, Uskaldunak, Kapalbara, Gadigal, Kanaka Malay, Kapalbara, Lakota, Maori, Mohawk, Palawa, and Samoan communities. We are Indigenous technologists, artists, scientists, cultural knowledge keepers, language keepers, and public policy experts. We came together because we were excited about the opportunities that artificial intelligence presents and concerned about the possible perils to our communities. So the working group gathered together in March of 2019 for our first meeting in order to think together about how we might conceptualize AI systems that are built from a foundation of Indigenous cultural values. We met again in May of the same year to spend 10 days together outlining a document to capture our thinking. And then 2 weeks ago, on July 14th, this summer, we published our Indigenous Protocol and Artificial Intelligence position paper. So I think if you're looking for new narratives for the current century, I encourage you to download and read the position paper at the URL on the screen. So the position paper contains a number of new ways of thinking about AI. We prioritize presenting a variety of perspectives over some monolithic voice of false authority, using a variety of different formats, ranging from design guidelines to scholarly essays to artworks to technology prototypes to poetry. We use the term Indigenous protocol specifically because of emphasis in many Native cultures in doing things in the right way, with the right way being the way which strengthens our circle of relationships with other humans and with non-humans. We believe that thinking in terms of protocol is central to designing ethical AI. The process must be sound for the result to be good. I'm going to focus the rest of this brief presentation on the guidelines for Indigenous-centered AI design, version 1, that we open the position paper with. While the guidelines were written primarily with Indigenous communities in mind, I would argue that they can and should be adapted to non-Indigenous contexts. So, guideline number 1, locality. Indigenous knowledge is often rooted in specific territories. It is also useful in considering issues of global importance. AI systems should be designed in partnership with specific indigenous communities to ensure the systems are capable of responding to and helping care for that community, in other words, grounded in the local, as well as connecting to global contexts, in other words, connected to the universal. Relationality and reciprocity. Indigenous knowledge is often relational knowledge. AI systems should be designed to understand how humans and non-humans are related to and interdependent on each other. Understanding, supporting, and encoding these relationships is a primary design goal. That goes back to what I was saying earlier about making relationality a first-class citizen in software design. AI systems are also part of the circle of relationships themselves. Their place and status in the circle will depend on specific communities and their protocols for understanding, acknowledging, and incorporating new entities into that circle. Responsibility, relevance, and accountability. Indigenous people are often concerned primarily with their responsibilities to their communities. AI systems developed by, with, and for Indigenous communities should be responsible to those communities, provide relevant support, and be accountable to those communities first and foremost. 4. Develop governance guidelines from Indigenous protocols. Protocol is a customary set of rules that govern behavior. Protocol is developed out of ontological, epistemological, and customary configurations of knowledge grounded in locality, relationality, and responsibility. Indigenous protocols should provide the foundation for developing governance frameworks that guide the use, role, and rights of AI entities in the society. There's a need to adapt existing protocols and develop new protocols for designing, building, and deploying AI systems. These protocols may be particular to specific communities, or they may be developed with a broader focus that may function across many Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. Sorry about that. 5, recognize the cultural nature of all computational systems. All technical systems are cultural and social systems. Every piece of technology is an expression of cultural and social frameworks for understanding and engaging with the world. AI systems designers need to be aware of their own cultural frameworks, socially dominant concepts, and normative ideals. Be wary of the biases that come with them, and develop strategies for accommodating other cultural and social frameworks. Computation is a cultural material. Computation is at the heart of our digital technologies, and as increasing amounts of our communication is mediated by such technologies, it has become a core tool for expressing cultural values. Therefore, it is essential to develop computational methods that reflect and enact our cultural practices and values as Indigenous people. Apply ethical design to the extended stack. Culture forms the foundation of the technology development ecosystem, or stack. Every component of the AI system hardware and software stack should be considered in the ethical evaluation of the system. This starts with how the materials for building the hardware and for energizing the software are extracted from the earth, and ends with how they return there. And finally, respect and support data sovereignty. Indigenous communities must control how their data is solicited, collected, analyzed, and operationalized. They decide when to protect it and when to share it, where the cultural and intellectual property rights reside, and to whom those rights adhere, and how those rights are governed. All AI systems should be designed to respect and support data sovereignty. Open data principles need to be further developed to respect the rights of Indigenous people in all the areas mentioned above and to strengthen equity of access and clarity of benefits. This should include a fundamental review of the concepts of ownership and property, which are the product of non-Indigenous legal orders and do not necessarily reflect the ways in which Indigenous communities wish to govern the use of their cultural knowledge. So let me just pause here to give a disclaimer. So don't appropriate. I'm not being prescriptive here. These concepts are all embedded in deep, complex webs of meaning that require people lifetimes before they may truly understand them in all their fullness. Rather, be inspired. So don't grab the ideas and run off with them. Consider them, how they might provide conceptual food for thought, how they might open up dialogue and expand our imaginations, perhaps even to inspire us to change frameworks. And actually, I have 2 disclaimers. So just because I'm a Hawaiian Samoan guy saying this and my essay collaborators are native, doesn't mean that all Hawaiians, Samoans, Lakota, Cree, Kanaka Maoli, etc. would agree with our interpretations. Some may not even agree that this is a productive conversation to have. As essay co-author and workshop participant Archer Pachawis noted, fierce debate can erupt when proposing a relationship between AIs and indigenous folks. My wife and I hosted a dinner party of mostly native friends when I raised the idea of accepting AIs into our circle of kinship. Our friends, who are from a number of different nations, were mostly opposed to this conclusion. That in itself surprised me. But what was more surprising was how vehement some guests were in their opposition to embracing AI in this manner. So, as the English saying goes, your mileage may vary, and there be dragons. Need to be careful about how you engage with this knowledge. So, to summarize, drawing on the work of the Indigenous Protocol on AI Workshops and Positions paper, these are my goals for AI system design. In fact, the design of any computational system that affects our lives, which means all of them. So AI system design that recognizes it is always already an expression of cultural values. AI systems designed to be part of indigenous circles of relationships. AI systems designed to help all of our kin, human and non-human, to flourish. So I look forward to the discussion. Mahalo.
Thank you. Mahalo. May I ask all the speakers to come back to us? Do we have them all online in Zoom? Not yet. Well, let's see, Ludger. Then I would. Oh, hang on.
Hey.
Hey. I think yes, and I was searching for the fourth, but you are sitting here. I would like to start ladies first. Professor Dr. Marion Weißenberger-Eibel, my pleasure. Ich bin sehr glücklich, dass Sie hier sind. Ich wäre noch mehr erfreut, wenn wir uns richtig treffen würden, weil ich habe tatsächlich in den 13 Jahren haben wir es nicht geschafft, dass wir uns mal treffen, obwohl ich eine Abteilung geleitet habe bei Fraunhofer und man dann doch mal zu anderen Netzwerkveranstaltungen geht. Und wie ich es schon in der Einführung gesagt habe, so viele Frauen gibt es in den Führungspositionen nicht. Ich möchte ein bisschen eingehen auf das, was Sie präsentiert haben. Visioning, Szenarien, Roadmapping. Sie sagen, Sie möchten mit Ihrer Arbeit Verständnis erzeugen und zum Handeln anregen. Wir haben heute und die letzten Tage viel dazu gehört, wir möchten zum Handeln hier anregen. Wie sieht denn das Ganze bei Ihnen praktisch aus? Arbeiten Sie, ich habe ja gesagt, Sie arbeiten mit Unternehmen, aber arbeiten die dann wiederum an Technologien oder Maßnahmenplänen oder arbeiten Sie auch direkt mit den Nutzern? Also mit dem Otto-Normalverbraucher.
Ja, vielen Dank
Wir hören Sie.
Vielen Dank für die Frage.
Ja, wir hören Sie.
Ja, wir hören Sie.
Okay. Also ich finde es sehr, sehr spannend, gerade mit Unternehmen zu arbeiten. Und gerade in dieser Situation bedarf es ja auch sozusagen immer wieder eine strategische Ausrichtung. Und da helfen einfach die Methoden der Zukunftsforschung. Also beispielsweise haben wir mit wissenschaftlichen Methoden begleiteten Unternehmen der Prozesstechnik. Das heißt, die haben sehr, sehr viel Wissen über Prozesstechnik im Medizinbereich aufgebaut, aber waren sich so ein bisschen selbst im Weg gestanden, um die neuen Ideen, auch die sie im Unternehmen trotz allem haben, auch auf eine entsprechende Leitbild, eine Vision umzumünzen und daraus tatsächlich Kraft zu schöpfen und die Kreativität im Unternehmen auch entsprechend einzusetzen für neue Produkte, neue Prozesse. Und es mündete dann entsprechend in verschiedenen Szenarien zu arbeiten und zu sagen, wollen wir beispielsweise stärker in Entwicklungsländer gehen oder wie sieht es aus im Bereich Emerging Markets? Soll eine China-Strategie aufgebaut werden? Und auf der Basis unterschiedlicher Szenarien, wo eben auch Wildcards gespielt werden, das heißt wirkliche disruptive Elemente, die die völlige Situation eines Unternehmens durchbrechen. Und diese Szenarien bringen dann die Möglichkeit, letztendlich auch auszuwählen und auch mal zu sehen, was gibt es denn an Möglichkeiten und welche Möglichkeiten kann ich entsprechende auch einsetzen mit eben diesem Know-how und den vielen Kompetenzen im Unternehmen. Und der nächste Schritt war sozusagen die Roadmap aufzubauen und zu sagen, ja, das sind die nächsten Schritte. Wer macht was, in welchem Zusammenhang und vor allem die Roadmap verbindet unterschiedliche Ebenen. Also zum einen die Ressourcenebene, die Kompetenzen des Unternehmens, die Marktebene, aber auch die Technologieebene. Und genau dieses Wechselwirkung dieser verschiedenen Ebenen und der Erstellung des Fahrplans führt dann dazu, dass tatsächlich Unternehmen sozusagen mit wissenschaftlichen Methoden begleitet vom Visioning tatsächlich in ganz konkrete Projekte auch starten können.
Konkrete Projekte mit echten Arbeitspaketen, jetzt geht los und arbeitet mit den Kompetenzen in eurem Unternehmen. Sie wurden unter anderem vom BMBF und dem Bundeskanzleramt in den Lenkungskreis der SDG-Wissenschaftsplattform Nachhaltigkeit 2030 berufen. Und Sie führen Gespräche mit den Bundespolitikern, aber eben auch direkt mit Angela Merkel. Wenn Sie sich die aktuellen Nachrichten ansehen oder hören, wie wir zum Beispiel am Freitag auch über den Green New Deal hier beim Beyond Festival diskutiert haben, da heißt es ja, dass Deutschland erst 2038 aus dem Kohleabbau aussteigen will. Ein bisschen frech formuliert, aber haben Sie da nicht manchmal auch einen Anflug von Frustration und denken sich, hört mir eigentlich hier keiner zu von diesen Politikern?
Das geht mir nicht so. Ganz bewusst eine Gegenrede dazu, denn ich hatte sehr, sehr gute Erfahrungen gemacht im direkten Gespräch. Also Sie haben Angela Merkel angesprochen, im Zukunftsdialog der Bundeskanzlerin, wo es um die Innovationskultur beispielsweise ging. Und da ist ein sehr konzentriertes Arbeiten, ein sehr intensives Zuhören, verstehen wollen. Und das, glaube ich, ist eine ganz, ganz hervorragende Basis dafür, auch Handlungen abzuleiten. Und wenn man das jetzt mal vergleicht, was auch in der Pandemiesituation entsteht, das heißt, wir haben gemerkt, da hört die Politik auf Mediziner, Virologen und andere Experten. Das heißt, wir sind ja nicht nur in der Transformation in eine Wissensgesellschaft, sondern wir sind mittendrin. Und das löst natürlich auch aus, dass Politik zuhört, aber gleichzeitig, und das ist mir sehr, sehr wichtig, wenn wir beraten in der Politik auf Bundes- oder Landesebene, ist es wichtig, auch Technologie offen ranzugehen. Das heißt tatsächlich, die Möglichkeiten auszuschöpfen und nicht vorneweg den Tunnel sozusagen einzuengen und zu sagen, ja, es kann nur diese eine Antriebstechnologie beispielsweise in der Mobilität geben, sondern wirklich die Optionen auf den Tisch zu legen und quer zu denken und auch die Dinge von anderen Perspektiven anzusehen. Und dann hilft sehr viel, wenn man da interdisziplinär herangeht. Das heißt, nicht nur die BWLer und die Technologen, sondern eben auch Psychologen, die sich mit dem Menschen auseinandersetzen und einfach Verhaltensweisen hier mit einbringen. Und insofern muss man auf der einen Seite sehen, dass natürlich hier Wissenschaft zuhört und gerade, wie gesagt, in kürzester Zeit haben wir das sehr intensiv erlebt. Und gleichzeitig muss man aber auch sehen, dass Politik sehr viel mit einem Aushandlungsprozess zu tun hat. Das heißt, Mehrheiten hinter sich zu bekommen, bestimmte Perspektiven auch austarieren, abzuwägen. Und das führt natürlich auch dazu, und das ist ja auch kein Hehl, dass das ein oder andere an Handlungsoptionen, die die Wissenschaft bereithält und auch darbietet und aufzeigt, vielleicht nicht zum Zuge kommt. Aber das ist kein Thema für Frustration, sondern im Gegenteil, Argumente, Fakten aufbauen und zeigen, mit Leidenschaft die Themen voranzutreiben. Das ist, glaube ich, sehr, sehr wichtig und dafür habe ich die Politik auch sehr kennengelernt.
Die faktenbasierte Narrative. Ich würde gerne bei Ihnen noch bleiben, einfach auch aus dem einfachen Grunde, weil wir auf Deutsch bleiben und ich dem Team damit mal eine Pause geben kann, dass sie nicht wieder immer hin und her zwischen müssen, zwischen Englisch und Deutsch mit der KI, die hier im Hintergrund läuft. Und für die anderen das, was wir beide gerade besprechen, auf Englisch online zeigt. Deswegen eine dritte Frage für Sie. Ludger Fans hat schon am Donnerstag das Thema erwähnt und auch heute Food Security. Ich habe in meiner Recherche, bin ich darauf gestoßen, dass Sie ein EU-weites Projekt als Konsortialführerin, respektive Ihr Institut, bereits 2015 betreut haben. Das war Simulact, Simulact. Können Sie kurz darauf eingehen, worum es in diesem Projekt ging?
Also aus meiner Sicht war das ein sehr, sehr spannendes Projekt. Und zwar ist es schon ein bisschen eine Neuheit für die EU gewesen. Es ist ein EU-Projekt, das wir entsprechend durchgeführt haben. Und das Thema war zu sagen, wie werden Zukünfte entwickelt. Und jetzt nicht sozusagen auf dem Reißbrett der Wissenschaft, sondern in Interaktion mit Bürgerinnen und Bürgern. Das heißt, es sind 1800 Bürgerinnen und Bürger befragt worden aus der EU, und zwar mit der Fragestellung, was erwarten Sie von einer Zukunft, wie sollte sie aussehen und welche Eigenschaften und Umsetzungspotenziale wünschen Sie sich. Und da sind 180 Visionen entstanden von EU-Bürgern. Die gingen über das Thema Energie, Food haben Sie angesprochen. Das heißt, nachhaltiger Konsum war ein Thema, aber auch Themen wie Sicherheit. Und das sind Ausgangspunkte gewesen, die Auswertungen für die EU, eine neue Forschungsagenda aufzusetzen. Das heißt, die Relevanz der Bürgerinnen und Bürger, der Erwartungen an die zukünftige Gestaltung des Lebens ist eingeflossen in eine Forschungs- und Innovationspolitik. Und das war ein ganz anderer Ansatz und für die EU-Projekte sozusagen schon mal eine Neuerung, die man sonst nur in Teilen auch erlebt. Und insofern sehr, sehr spannend, wie die Bürgerinnen und Bürger da wirklich mitgezogen haben. Und es waren tolle Ergebnisse. Sehr, sehr spannendes Projekt.
Last but not least noch eine Frage zum Thema. Sie haben das Thema Geoengineering angesprochen und das hat ja auch Markus Schmidt doch tatsächlich mit einer anderen Sichtweise in seinem Vortrag gehabt. Absolut ein spannendes Thema. Nun weiß ich aber, dass Sie auch in anderen Studien und zum Beispiel auch für eine Studie der Fraunhofer Gesellschaft an Zukunftsthemen gearbeitet haben bzw. untersucht haben und diese in Kategorien unterteilt haben, in zum Beispiel Langläufer oder das Thema Zukunftsoptionen, welche heute noch nach Science Fiction aussieht oder klingen. Gab es darunter Themen, Trends, Technologien, die Sie überrascht haben, wo Sie persönlich auch ein hohes Potenzial sehen, also in Ihren Augen ein hohes Potenzial diese Technologie hat und vielleicht hier auch ein typisches Beispiel für eine neue Narrative im 21. Jahrhundert sein kann?
Ein Beispiel, das mich sehr überzeugt hat, und Sie haben die Studie angesprochen, wir haben für Fraunhofer intern eine Studie gemacht und 51 Hotspot-Zukunftsthemen entwickelt. Also die Frage war dahinter zu sagen, was wird Forschung und Gesellschaft zukünftig prägen und aber auch, welche Märkte können sich daraus differenzieren. Und ein sehr, sehr spannendes Projekt oder Thema, was rausgekommen war, ist Biohybride. Das ist eine Kombination aus biologischen Komponenten und technologischen Komponenten. Das heißt beispielsweise DNA oder Proteine werden kombiniert mit entsprechend Oberflächen, Polymeren oder anderen Materialien, um da sozusagen eine neue Art der Biosensorik auch zu nutzen. Und als Beispiel, um es vielleicht ein bisschen greifbarer zu machen, gibt es auf der EU-Seite das Projekt, vielleicht kennt es der eine oder andere, Flora Robotica. Und ich finde das insofern sehr spannend, denn es wird im Grunde mit Pflanzen Städte gebaut. Das heißt, mit diesem Projekt wird ein biohybrider Roboter entwickelt, der den Menschen dabei begleitet, das Wachstum der Pflanzen für sozusagen lebendige Mauern und Räume mit zu steuern. Das heißt, auch das Wachstum der Pflanzen beobachten und auch letztendlich mitsteuern kann. Das heißt, es ist so ein Roboter, der die Interaktion zwischen Mensch und der wachsenden Pflanzenstadt letztendlich auch ausübt. Und das finde ich schöne Beispiele, die tatsächlich aus meiner Sicht überraschend waren und mich ganz persönlich begeistern.
Und wenn Sie jetzt das hören, wie Markus Schmidt das Thema Bioengineering angesprochen hat, er hat ja gezeigt, dass über 100 NGOs das doch eher als negatives Thema betrachten. Wie ist das aus Ihrer Sichtweise? Sie hatten es ja nur kurz angerissen.
Genau. Also ich denke, es gibt natürlich immer verschiedene Seiten einer Medaille. NGOs mögen das Thema vielleicht kritisch sehen. Auf der anderen Seite, glaube ich, sind genauso wie NGOs oder auch die Wirtschaft und die Politik Teil der Gesellschaft. Und genau diesen Diskurs auszuhandeln und zu sagen, was sind die Vorteile, was sind die Nachteile und wie kann ich damit möglicherweise auch meinen Horizont und andere Perspektiven erweitern und vielleicht nochmal anders denken und auch andere Fachdisziplinen mit dazu nehmen, weil es dann eine andere Perspektive bekommt. Und ich sage das deshalb, weil ich sehr davon überzeugt bin, dass wir auch, ich spreche jetzt mal als Wissenschaftlerin in Deutschland, sehr überzeugt davon bin, dass wir auch ein Narrativ in Deutschland brauchen, wie und wovon wollen wir leben. Und das hat mit Technologie zu tun, aber das hat sehr viel damit zu tun, auch den Schritt, den ich vorhin sagte, zurückzugehen und zu sehen, wo kommt denn Technologie letztendlich auch her? Das heißt, der Mensch steht vor der Technologie und das letztendlich in den Diskurs einzubringen, das fände ich sehr, sehr wichtig, weil diese Frage entsprechend mit einem Leitbild, einem Orientierungswissen zu untermauern, wie und wovon wollen wir leben und welche Rolle hat Technologie und nicht als zwei Punkte, die sozusagen Technologie und Mensch nebeneinander stehen, sondern letztendlich entsprechend gemeinsam zusammenwachsen und dadurch auch mehr entstehen kann und Besseres entstehen kann.
Weiter Arbeit für die Zukunft in interdisziplinären Teams. Danke, Frau Professor Weißenberger-Eibel. Markus Schmidt, you understand obviously everything as much as I know as being in Austria. What's your take on now I switch again. Professor Weißenberger-Eibel, she said that her experience with the politicians are actually really positive, and obviously it's always always about compromises. As I said in my introduction, that you are also working with governments and you are in a lot of, you develop reports and you are helping commissions. Do you have the same positive experience?
Hören Sie mich jetzt als die erste Frage?
Ja.
Können Sie mich hören? Ja.
Ja. Sollen wir auf Deutsch
Ich würde auch auf Deutsch.
Okay,
ja, ich glaube, es ist auch okay, wenn wir auf Deutsch sprechen in Österreich.
Dann sagen wir schnell der
sprechen
KI,
wir ja auch
dass
Deutsch.
wir jetzt von Deutsch auf Englisch
Ob wir
Perfekt.
die gleiche Erfahrung gesammelt haben. Ich würde mal so sagen, dass so die Erfahrungen kommen in erster Linie von der Europäischen Kommission und von den Vorstellungen, welche Projekte und welche Ziele zu erreichen sind oder erreicht werden sollten. Und das definiert dann auch die Forschungsagenten mit. Und da hat sich das in den letzten, sag ich mal, 10, 15 Jahren insofern gewandelt, als das vor 10, 15 Jahren noch relativ offen war. Und mittlerweile gibt es ja immer stärkere Vorgaben, in welche Richtung es gehen soll. Also zum Beispiel, dass die Bioökonomie gestärkt werden soll. Das heißt, es ist zwar verstanden worden, dass die Wissenschaft oder die sozusagen Technologieentwicklung einen positiven Beitrag für die Gesellschaft leisten kann. Gleichzeitig wird das Korsett aber immer enger, in welchem Framework sozusagen man sich bewegen soll, um eine positive Wirkung für die Gesellschaft zu erzielen. Und ich glaube, das ist genau das, was die NGOs kritisieren. Die akzeptieren dieses Framework so nicht und in gewisser Weise sind das Spielverderber, also sie die Spielregeln nicht akzeptieren. Und das habe ich auch versucht in meinem Vortrag zu konterkarieren. Also einerseits dieser sozusagen moderne Zugang, teilweise auch postmoderne Zugang, um solche Probleme zu lösen. Und dann auf der anderen Seite dieses Nicht-Akzeptieren des Framings und um eine radikale Weichenstellung zu vollziehen. Und also, das sehe ich noch nicht, wie die Politik hadert das sicherlich, diese zwei komplett unterschiedlichen Herangehensweisen unter den Hut zu bringen. Ja, also ich glaube, die ist da etwas überfordert damit.
Yeah. We heard, I think, yesterday that we can't change politics, but we have to change the way we do politics. Like, where we can't change the political people itself, the politicians. Sorry, Ludger, as you work with funded projects, can you see that there is an understanding in those projects when because the proposals are given out from the European Union or from the German government. Do you see that there is a shift in understanding that the climate crisis is not a crisis but a change, that we have to address that, and how we work interdisciplinary?
Well, now with COVID, I think a lot of people are aware that things can be very, very rapidly. We were talking with politicians about climate change since 77, 79. I can show you a Tagesschau, a news from the first climate conference in Geneva from 79, and if you take the sound, it would be exactly the same sound like when we have a climate conference today. It was just the imaging was different in 79 from a news. We are, time is running out. We know everything since 30 years. What I see is in Asia, they are much quicker to react. They are much more eager to react, and I hope Europe will wake up. We have slept too long. But I know, and the more pressure it's coming up now, people start to think. But normally, when you talk in Europe, then they said, well, let's make a commission and talk it through. And the commission takes 3 years, and then they find some ideas, and then there's a European Council who kind of narrows it down. It's the same with the UN. I was working with Gürzel in the UN group for indigenous people. And we worked with hundreds and hundreds of different indigenous communities for 3 years to draft a declaration. And then this declaration was weakened completely by the next higher commission, and then it was vetoed by China, Russia, and the US. So outcome after 3 years of work was nothing. And this is what my feeling a little bit about of politics. But I think when you have heat under your ass, and when we're sitting in a fried pan, and hopefully we don't jump into the fire, we have to move, and Europe has to move now.
But yeah, they have to. But do you get frustrated because you're saying it's the same?
We have no time to be frustrated.
Yeah, well,
Gramsci once said, "I'm pessimist by intellect, but optimist by will."
Very good saying. Jason, Professor Weissenberger-Eibes said technology stands not in front of people. Technology should be in service, not the opposite. Should be in service of us, and not the opposite around. I remember what you said in your presentation was that one of your friends had this dinner, and everybody who was there was not in favor of integrating the indigenous voice into the artificial intelligence algorithm. Is that correct? If so, if I understood that correct, what did they say? Why were they so as you said, environment really extremely against it?
So just a slight correction. It wasn't everybody was against it. There were some people who were not enthusiastic about it. And that stemmed from, I believe, sort of two things. One is that there's a long history of these sorts of technologies being used against indigenous people and brown people in general, sort of non-Europeans, non-Americans, non-Anglos. And so there's a general sense of okay, why do we want to contribute to technologies that we already see are discriminating against us? And then there's another point of reluctance, which is that there's also the issue of indigenous knowledges being appropriated and sort of kind of sucked into these larger systems without a full understanding of the indigenous knowledge systems that they came from, without permission of the people from which the knowledge came. And so there's also a general reluctance to expose ourselves to yet another situation where our knowledge is going to be seen as valuable and expropriated, but then actually indigenous people themselves do not benefit. And this is what I see as a general caution, as a little bit of the language that I've seen in the conference, and my experience sort of talking and living in Europe is sort of backs this up, is that I think there's often kind of a desire to sort of like appropriate very specific kinds of indigenous knowledges that make you feel good and make you feel comfortable, but without an understanding of the full context in which those indigenous knowledges are embodied.
I remember when I was living in Australia, some of my friends went to Macquarie University, and the Germans, they went to the lecture on Aborigine arts and Aborigine history, and there were no other Australians in these groups, saying that only the Europeans were interested in learning, but not the people who are living in that country. They were, I guess they didn't have the awareness, but as much as I understand you, also the indigenous themselves, they think they are not heard anyway?
Well, no, I mean, I think this is a common thing. I mean, for me, it's interesting also listening to the conference, so when kind of talking about the non-first world that's not taking, that's not benefiting by these technologies, the reference is always to Africa, right? But you guys have that in your own backyard, right? In the same way that North America and Australia has it in our own backyard. But the people who are living there, they don't want to look in their own backyard. They don't want to solve that problem first, because it involves them having to make hard choices and give up things in their own backyard. They want to look to Africa, or they want to look to Australia, or they want to look somewhere else where they can do this good work, because it's much easier when you're sort of like going somewhere else and doing it than looking at the people in your own cities, who are discriminated against and are not being given a voice in the way this technology is developed. And so part of the reason why we emphasize in the discussions that we're having is we work with our communities, and everybody else should be working with their communities too. So those Australians, non-Aboriginal Australians, should have been there to work with the communities that live around them. But we see this dynamic everywhere, Europe, North America, Australia, New Zealand. It's just much easier to go and try to help people who are far away from you and that don't have any immediate real ability to push back and to make claims on you. So this is one of the things we have to think about with our technology, is that, I know the conversation again is there's this kind of will to internationalism and cosmopolitanism, and there are things very much to recommend that. But, really, if you want to make a difference, you got to work locally, and you got to pay attention to the communities that are local to you. And this desire to sort of like expand and abstract and make general, so we're going to solve everything at once, is one of the reasons why we're in the mess that we are in now. So that's why we think that the work that we're doing in the Indigenous Protocol and AI workshops is not just applicable to Indigenous people, but actually we think it's probably pretty good advice for most everybody else.
Thank you. Actually, Ludger, please.
I just want to say one thing. Tomorrow at the film festival, I think it's at 1 o'clock, but look at the schedule. We will have a discussion with all the local people from here, from the politics, from the activist sides, from the unions, and we will discuss what we can do here in Baden-Württemberg and in the Black Forest region.
Yeah, because that's what I just wanted to say. I think it was yesterday or it was at this festival that we talked about deglobalization in a way that we have to eat the food that is around us. We have to talk to the people that are around us. And maybe it's a really personal thing for you. I'm not sure if we ever talked about it on stage, but we sometimes say that we claim it that you are a European indigen. Do you know anything about the people you have come from, that they are still, that their voice is heard here?
Well, I come from a village with 1,500 people. We have an own language, and we was regarded by the Nazi as white gypsies. We never, and we were called Danish. We never considered ourselves as Danish, as a population. But yes, we still exist. You see, I'm sitting here.
No, I mean like as a community. When you say there were 1,500 people.
Well, it's bigger now. And it still has some very local tradition. Some parts of our language are still existing, only some part. But more or less we are integrated into the big flow, or what you call now Germany.
Yeah. Thorsten, as Jason, I think, point out something really critical here. Can I ask what kind of regional projects you are working on? I guess it's still Bremen.
Yes. Yeah, it's Bremen. I'm not in Bremen. I'm in Schleswig-Holstein. We inherited a big old farmhouse. And,
oh yeah. Well,
I'm sitting here. So this.
So let's talk about North Germany, northern Germany.
North Germany, right? This wood here is 300 years old. So this is very nice being here. But please let me understand your question again.
I'm saying we should look around us in our own backyard and address the problems that we have in our own backyard. Would you consider the concept or the project you had with the Elbphilharmonie as your own backyard project, where you said, here I can do something?
I mean, your own backyard is if we consider that to be a metaphor, your work at the field and where you're active, of course, is kind of your own backyard. And what I tried in my statement to do for myself mainly is to get a little bit clearer on the idea how my responsibility as a designer in that terms is to be understood as a contribution to a bigger change movement. And what is just said that we have to act locally. This is totally the answer to many problems, but it brings up another problem, because of course there is this need for the big idea or the big solution. We all would wish that somebody would came and say, okay, listen, this is like the master formula for all problems, and we're going to install it now, right? And there's a big desire for that. But still, this is not the way it would work. The change is happening on a very iterative and local level, and I see that. But still, on the other side, and that's like the topic of the discussion also today, is what is the narrative of the future? I think beside that, we have to act locally and be aware of that, our lifestyle, everything that we do is part of the problem, actually. There is, I think, the need for a bigger narrative. So if you look at social change, it's a very complex and a multi-layered thing that to be happen. And I mean, it's not that we don't produce new narratives right now. So especially if you look at COVID-19 in the last 3 months, I heard several stories, new narratives, but they were coming from a corner from the conspiracy realm of flat earthers and up to the wildest ideas that kind of make or all produced by the desire of producing kind of a formula that explains how everything works. So these kind of narratives in the conspiracy, and I take them very seriously, not in the sense what they say, but as a expression of making sense or making meaning. Yeah, the desire of to make meaning. They all try to produce construct this kind of kind of new narrative that explains the complexity of our time. And I think we're kind of in the middle, you know, between like more and more realizing that the old system and also values doesn't kind of work anymore in the new understanding, and doesn't serve us anymore as we trusted them to do in the past, but still haven't yet found another idea where we're heading. What is the future a human being live, look, and work like? You know, it's like kind of an in-between status, and there's as I just quoted with the conspiracy, there's a big need of an idea of where are we basically heading in very basic question. This is also, I think, why we discussing under the headline of a new narrative. And of course, this has like two sides, because we all know what kind, how stories and narratives spread on a global or a bigger level can also produce like big harm and world wars. We all know that. But nevertheless, I think without these two layers, or being aware of these two layers of producing an idea of the future that we are heading, and beneath that the real change is happening on a local level, which is this will be I think the or kind of a recipe where or kind of task that need to be solved. And one last thing to the political connection. So I heard a lot of, and there's a lot of criticism against the politic, but still, I think, you know, Einstein once said, I think he quoted, like, you cannot solve a problem with a system that initially produced the problem, right? You have to, so what I think is that we have to really think out of the box and not expect the politicians to produce this kind of narrative or this kind of aim. But we can expect, once we are clear about where we're heading, the politic system to follow up these ideas and to bring that to life. More or less can expect that, but not. I find many of these criticism in a too high expectation of please save us, you know, and that's not what's going to happen. We have to save ourselves, and all the designers, creatives, and researchers that are thinking like in out of the box and in new concepts are the ones who produce these solutions, but also ideas where we're heading, and we cannot like wait for a king to save us here. We have to do it our own.
Thank you. I have to wrap it up, and that's why I want to give the last question to you. What gives you hope for the new narrative of the 21st century?
Well, I think
I don't want to come up again with Ludger's quote of "I'm an optimist by will."
Yeah, Octopus University.
But first, okay, I have to drop the cliches here. I 2 years ago I became father. Sorry, but this is like a thing that every morning at 8 o'clock or earlier, optimism wakes me by in form of this child. But no, I think that you know, if you look like in the history of human mankind, that also, if you look like the first rocket that human mankind sent up to the moon, it was considered impossible to do that within that time slot, right? But they did it, and there are reasons why that happened. And I think that there is optimism, and there is hope. If every layer is kind of not synchronized, but if we have a like gathered understanding where we want to go, and so I'm from my background, I'm really technology driven, but I'm starting to change more and more, also as an artist, to search in that directions of the look for the meaning and look for a new narrative for a future to become. Because I think if we can answer that more and more and bring that, also contribute that into society, we can do incredible things. and we can hold change and hold ourselves stable within huge complexity environments. And so that's where I keep my hope that with that we can do incredible things.
Thank you, Thorsten. Expect me to come really soon to your farmhouse. Last words to Ludger. What gives you hope?
Well, as you know, we are organizing this Beyond event and this Future Design symposium now almost nine or 10 years.
2011.
And we always all the dramaturgy of all those different little slot bringing people together who normally are not connected. And we end always up in this idea of what is the new narrative. The last year we talked about post-capitalism, ideas of post-capitalism, or the new narratives. And I think the new narrative which we are searching for is not a new Bible or a new Capital by Karl Marx. What we are looking for, and this is why we are setting up this network, is a symphony of a lot of voices trying to make a composition in a kind of harmony, or at least resonating with each other. And I think this will be such a pluralistic, systemic narrative of our unique unitedness in this biosphere, in this small critical sphere which we call our planet. I think this is the symphony we are trying to reach for, and I hope everybody will drum and sing with us. So thank you.
Thank you. I am happy to wrap up. I see that I want to say thank you to the panelists. They are still there. Thank you so much for your contribution. Ludger is running over to prepare the art installation that we will see from Vibeke Sörensen. Oh, I just saw you all. Thank you and bye. Let me say goodbye before I hand over to Ludger. I think we are doing here critical work to bring people together who normally don't talk with each other just because they don't meet, just because the documentary filmer is going to a documentary film festival. But the Beyond Festival thinks beyond, and that's why I'm happy to always be here. And if you want to see what's going on this afternoon, you have to check out our webpage, and you stay with us from all over the different platforms we are providing the stream in the afternoon. Annabelle Madeng will moderate the festival, and you can still buy the tickets. And by the way, that allows you to see the films, the 50 films of the festival that have been created here for the next 2 weeks. It's 19.90 euros, so just under $20. Yes, 19.90. You can see them all for 2 weeks open. You can contribute helping those filmmakers to make the next big things and to help them flourish. And I'd say, Ludger, I give the words to you, but really to also thank you for always integrating me in this. And I'm really happy to push the boundaries and put the A in STEM and make it STEAM, and talk with all these other individuals. So thank you for listening. I'm off. He's there.
Okay, thank you, Kathleen. Thank you for being part of the family and being there whenever I need you.
My pleasure.
I want to switch to the art session, and we wanted to show a lot of works, 3 works of our dream couple, Vibeke Sörensen and Steve. Hi. I just want, you can introduce the works, and I just have to say that Dreamtime, when I tried to start it, it crashed. So we will need to start with offering, and I try to repair the file. Okay, but you can say something to your works, and then I start offerings, and then I try to start the other works. Okay? Are you still here? We need your sound.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for this opportunity and for your, amazing symposium again this year. We're thrilled to be part of it. So we're starting with the other two and put Dreamscape last, right? As I understand it?
If you could show Dreamscape from your computer, in my computer the file crashed at the moment, so I would start with offering and try to repair the file.
I think we start with the other because we're on a different computer and he doesn't have it on this computer. So
Okay.
Then if it's okay, we'll start with, no, we were going to show the pop talk first. The Bali, Steve Lansing's water temples first, and then offerings. Can
Okay.
we do that?
Okay, then I try to switch. One moment. How it's in Chinese?
Oh.
Dangisha.
It's in Chinese.
So, as we see that our artificial intelligence for translating it still needs some approval. We still have to learn a lot of languages to be able to communicate in this symphony I proposed. So I start with Steve's lecture. Could you switch and give me the sound?
In some years, working on trying to make that system visible, a system of water temples. So originally the problem was convincing economists, engineers, the World Bank that there was a functional significance to the way things happen in Bali. But we now sort of have to scale up because the opportunity with the World Heritage proposal is to tell that story to the world. So this is sort of a first draft of an attempt to begin to do that, and I invite and ask for your assistance. So off we go to the island of Bali. Right, there we go. Except first we'll go to Angkor Wat. Story actually begins there, where several archaeologists learned recently that much of Angkor was invisible. It turns out that Angkor Wat was the largest pre-modern, so to say, city ever, but it was not recognized as such until the work of Damien Evans and Roland Fletcher and some other people. Anyway, there it is, this enormous thing, certainly the most intriguing for an archaeologist system of irrigation anybody ever created. And up in the headwaters of the main river that irrigates the Angkorian system, there we are, there are several hundred sacred objects. It's called the Valley of the Linga. And in the center of these, so as the water flows over those stones, it's purified, okay? And this was created at just about the beginning of the Angkorian period. They saw to it that the water that would come down and irrigate that world would be sanctified. And you'll see here in the center, the central image is the god Vishnu, who's meditating at the end of the third age of the world, which ended in fire, for 1,000 years as to whether he would restart the world. Shall we give it another try? So at the end of 1,000 years, he decided, what the hell, or words to that effect in Sanskrit. And you will see there is Brahma emerging from the lotus. It's the beginning of our age. That's the beginning of the fourth world. But Angkor, we sent actually our team of Balinese who are working on the World Heritage Project went to Angkor to have a look, and they found it very sad because although the waters are still sanctified, Angkor is now what UNESCO calls a dead monument, right? This week, UNESCO will decide on whether Bali will have a World Heritage Site for the water temples in the Subaks, which I'll explain to you in a minute. So like Angkor Wat, it contains beautiful archaeological sites, although rather smaller ones than Angkor. Come on, quick. But it's still alive in Bali, right? It's still very much alive. So the goal of this World Heritage Project is to keep it alive by making it visible. The problem all along has been that the way in which this work was simply invisible to well-meaning, but well-meaning foreign engineers, consultants, agronomists, all kinds of people simply fail to recognize what it is. So that's what I'm going to try to make clear to you. This talk is thus part of that project. It's like a first try, okay? So the question is, what are they trying to save? Why are the Balinese so keen? Well, it is a landscape that's been engineered by the farmers and managed by networks of Pura Subak, or water temples, we can call them. I'm having trouble with the clicker. Or at least it was, until recently. 1970s, the Green Revolution began with well-intentioned attempts to boost the rice production on Bali and elsewhere in Indonesia, and that necessarily was a top-down project, launched, again, I have to emphasize, by people with absolutely the best of intentions. It just turns out that the world's complicated. So here's the story. All right, 6. the Green Revolution had just begun. The Green Revolution means the introduction of Western farming techniques, basically. It's high-yielding plants that are designed to grow quickly, along with chemical fertilizers and pesticides. So this came as a package to the Balinese farmers. The farmers were told, in the interests of national development, take this new rice and plant just as fast as you can. If you can get 3 crops a year, great. Some of the old people said, well, the trouble with that is, according to our traditional system, we schedule, we carefully time when the water goes into the fields and when it doesn't, and there are reasons for that.
After a couple of years of bumper harvests, those reasons started to become clear. Stephen Lansing's old friend, Wayan Paga, is a farmer in Sebatu. He remembers what it was like 20 years ago when the pests began to appear.
Waktu sekitar tahun 80-an tuh dah diulang lagi.
The Green Revolution remedy for pests was pesticides. It's not just that the farmers were advised to use pesticides, they were forced to use pesticides. They would be punished by the government if they didn't, because the government would say, if anybody doesn't use pesticides immediately, as soon as any sign of pests appear, then the pests will spread to other fields. So within a year or two, even the farmers, pumping these pesticides into their fields couldn't kill all the pests. The government then began to fly the island, dropping pesticides from airplanes, and they succeeded in killing damn near everything.
Itu kepercayaan tetap fungsinya kepada Sang Pencipta, karena segala yang hidup itu ditentukan oleh Sang Pencipta.
He says that everything is made by a creator, and so by disturbing anything, by killing anything, you're disturbing part of the creation. So you need to pay attention to the whole picture. Essentially saying you have to pay attention to the whole picture.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that, Stephen told me, was the role of the water temple. Looking at the whole picture, applying wisdom accumulated over centuries.
In the middle courtyard of the temple, the farmers gather every month. They make decisions in a democratic assembly on how they're going to plant. So here's how it works. That's our village, that's our subak. We share the water that comes from that weir with those guys, and we coordinate with the people upstream. And we do that by going up and making offerings at that temple. So the hydrological system is mirrored by a system of water temples. It's just that simple. But networks like that can have emergent properties. So we've talked about complexity. John Holland in 1975, I think, is the one who defined it first. So complex adaptive system, a network of interacting agents who are trying to maximize something. Turns out that sometimes the network that emerges can have properties that you can understand without bothering what's going on at the lower levels. So I'm going to convince you that that's what you're looking at. Okay, so here we have, begins with ecology. Rice paddies are artificial ponds. It's the fertility of the pond aquaculture that makes the rice grow. So the control of water is how the thing works. Turns out that Balinese volcanics are rich in potassium and phosphate, which is fortunate for the farmers. So if you look at the phosphate flowing down into the irrigation water, here you probably can't see it too well, but that's the water coming in at the beginning of the planting system. And after they planted the rice, look, the phosphate's being used by the rice plant. So it's a perfect little hydroponic delivery system for the farmers. They're very fortunate in their volcano, okay? Perhaps even more than the Icelanders. However, it's not a perfect story because as the monsoon rains fall on that steep volcanic landscape and pick up these minute, sharp pieces of volcanic pumice, they develop a cutting edge. So they slice the rivers down like this into the channels of ravines. If you're a farmer, the problem is, how do you get the water from down there to where you can use it to grow rice? 896 AD, there is an inscription that refers to irrigation tunnel builders. There are still traditional irrigation tunnel builders in Bali. If you work hard enough for a couple of years, then you can build tunnels that go through solid rock for several hundred meters and create a system like that. All of the farmers who obtain water from the same irrigation channel form a subak. They create a temple where they give thanks to the powers that make the rice grow there. And when they have meetings in those water temples, they set aside the rules of caste and the Balinese language, which insists you can't speak Balinese without indicating the relative caste status of the person you're talking to. It's worse than an academic department. But you have to set that aside during the Subaks. The Subaks begin in the 12th century, so it's one of the few functioning ancient democratic institutions that we know about. It's kind of beautiful. Up in the center of the main volcanic lake, there is, it's thought to be the home of a goddess, the goddess of waters. Water temple priests from around the lake collect holy water, which is considered to be the blessing of the goddess. So the water belongs to the goddess, and if you grow things with her water, it would behoove you to make an offering to her, to acknowledge your thanks. This is how it works.
The Balinese call their religion Agama Tirtha, the religion of water. Each village temple controls the water that flows into nearby rice terraces.
So that's one subak.
Regional water temples control the flow into larger areas.
10 subaks.
High up on the volcano Mount Batur, there is an enormous crater lake. The Balinese believe the lake is the home of the goddess of the waters, Dewi Danu, who makes the waters flow into the rivers and irrigation canals. The supreme water temple of Bali sits on the rim of the crater overlooking the lake. Once a year, priests give holy water from the lake to the farmers as a blessing from the goddess. First, priests ascend the crater to collect drops of water from the steam of the active volcano.
Zenith of a mandala.
Then the priests prepare the holy water for the farmers. A temple scribe writes letters on palm leaves inviting farmers to the temple. Delegations from over 200 villages journey up the mountain to bring offerings to the goddess. At the Supreme Water Temple, the gamelan orchestra plays in honor of the goddess and the worshippers. Temple priests give a sujung, a bamboo container filled with holy water, to each village delegate. The delegations then carry the holy water to their regional temples.
Heads of 10 subaks. That's a regional water
Here,
temple.
the water from the goddess is mixed with more holy water, adding the blessings of local gods and goddesses. Each delegate receives a sujung of this water to take back to his village. At the village temples, local farmers receive a blessing for themselves and their fields. A few drops of holy water are sprinkled on every field. This ritual symbolizes the sharing of water that forms a coordinated system of irrigation in Bali. Working together in this way, the Balinese have maintained the ecology of their rice terraces for over 1,000 years.
That's the system. But they can also use it to control rice pests. It's quite simple. Lots of other things besides people like to eat rice. But by synchronizing the harvest over a sufficiently large area, you remove the habitat, the food for the pests, and the pests have nothing to eat. Their populations will decline. Not all gone, but they will decline. However, it means everybody has to plant at the same time on a fixed schedule. Otherwise, the pests can migrate. And you need to pay attention to which pests you're dealing with so that you get the size of that fallowing period right. That's what the water temples do. Here's how we think it works. Simplified, simple question we ask the farmers, which is worse? Water shortages or pest damage? If you're the upstream farmer, if you synchronize and you allow the downstream guy to get a little of your water, right? You give up that water, but then you both harvest at the same time, pests are under control. Alternatively, if you're the upstream farmer, you have the option of keeping as much water as you like, but my pests from downstream may come up and eat your rice. So we asked 150 farmers in 10 subaks, which is worse. You can't see the picture, but what it shows is perfectly, the upstream farmers indeed worry about pests. They don't have to worry about water. The downstream guys worry about water. So that worked. However, it doesn't really explain things because we've got dozens and dozens of these subaks connected with each other, water and pests going in all different directions. So how does it actually work? How do they get it right at the scale of whole watersheds? Here's a map of 2 rivers, 172 little irrigation subocs, obviously not to scale. Simulation model starts with everybody choosing a cropping schedule. Then we simulate the rain flows, goes into the canals, the rice grows, the pests move around. We calculate the harvest yield and test it and discover, lo and behold, the water temples get the right scale of coordination to optimize harvest yields. So when I gave that talk at the Santa Fe Institute for the first time, a guy named Walter Fontana, a physical chemist, said, "That's very interesting." This is when my talk ended in those days. He said, "That's very interesting, Steve, but you've just told us they had 1,000 years to figure this out, so maybe it's not surprising they got it right. Tell me, did someone have to invent and engineer this system, or could it self-organize?" Which seemed like a good question. So we built a hill climbing model, and I learned what self-organization means. Same model, only in this case, we start with random cropping patterns for every suboc. So maybe the star means plant in January and August, and the triangle means something else, just a random schedule, right, for the year. And we simulate a year. Then at the end of the year, everybody checks to see who got the most rice, who got the best harvest, me or one of my 4 neighbors around me. If any of the neighbors did better, I copy what they did. Otherwise, I stick with my plan, and we iterate, okay? So that's all there is to it, like 10 lines of code. Here's year 1, random cropping patterns, less than 5 tons of rice per hectare. That's not good. By year 10, these blocks of synchronized harvests have appeared. See that? And the rice yields have nearly doubled. And finally, there's the actual water temple system, global optimum. It works. It works. As a matter of fact, no matter what the biology is, we can change the pest virulence or the water. As long as you allow them to have this learning process, it will always grow a water temple network, and it will always approach a global optimum. Everybody does well, so it means there's no reason to be jealous, which otherwise could be a factor, because everybody does equally well. Good news for the farmers. Growing water temple networks always succeeds, but I don't think I have time to explain. Well, I'll say very quickly. If you check with 3 neighbors, some of you find a solution, but some don't. This is the years going by. This is how many subocs change their cropping pattern. If we go to checking with 4 neighbors, a few more get it within a few years. If we get to 13, check with 13 neighbors and see who did better, nearly everybody finds the solution, and they find it faster. If, on the other hand, we say, well, just check anywhere in the system, it's a recipe for chaos. Information doesn't get there, right? It really is a simple little complex adaptive system. So temple networks will always grow. Right, so in my remaining 3 minutes, having given you a functional explanation for water temple networks, why then is most of the business of subocs about ritual? Why bother with ritual? Okay. Balinese cosmology is dualistic. Inner world of the self, outer world of the universe. The two are composed of the same things. Male and female. The rituals of the subocs have to do with female powers of transformation and growth. And I think I can't show you this clip, so I'll just tell you that in the end what it means is, since everything in the inner world is also in the outer world, krodha means anger, and it lives here in me, and if you only knew it, it lives in the same place in you, okay? All those things are thought to be the same. Those are the elements of the inner world. They're composed of the same things, but we can get them out of whack. We can become disaligned. We can become too angry. The purpose of the rituals is to align those elements of the inner world, the self. So every year people make offerings. If you visit Bali, you'll see many offerings all the time. Colors, sounds, music, they are also emotions. They're also the components of the outer world. And by aligning those things together, we kind of concentrate on what it takes to maintain a world in which these water temples will succeed. So the offerings depict them in perfect order. They relate simultaneously to the inner world and to the outer world, like this. And with greater complexity comes more perfect order, okay? So that's how they look. Here's the most complex water temple offering of them all, but there are much simpler ones like that. When a Balinese is born, these elements are aligned. When they die, here are the elements decomposing from a farmer's body on the burial shroud, here from the body of a high priest, a Vedanta high priest who spent the last half of his life trying to increase his powers of concentration over himself So it's just depicted in the world. This is how the world works. This is how you work. Okay, so that was the idea. That's what the rituals are about. I've got a minute. So the control of the self is how you maintain rice paddies. If people don't cooperate, then what looks like a beautiful jeweled, beveled landscape of water temple, of terraces, turns into a muddy hillside. Requires continuous cooperation. We have inscriptions from Subaks from the 12th century. They're still in business, so they maintain this. Sometimes they fail, but they're able to maintain it. Okay, so 1970s, the top-down green revolution began in Bali. Everybody plants as often as possible with no coordination, so as to boost rice production. But in effect, what they're doing is you can duplicate this with our simulation model by running it in reverse, taking the system of globally optimal patterns created by the water temples and backing it up into chaos. You will get the same results as happened in Bali. Miracle rice produced miracle pests. The water temples, in short, were simply invisible. They were not seen. So the goal of the World Heritage is to make them visible. Perhaps at this point I should stop. Thank you very much.
Okay, this was the first part. And Steve, Vibeke, are you still here? So I will show offerings and then try to see you back in Zoom, and then I hope Dreamscape will work finally. Offerings works. So here we go.
The Balinese believe that the crater lake is the home of the goddess who makes the rivers flow into their fields. Each year, more than 200 villages receive invitations to bring offerings of the food that grows in their fields to the temple of the goddess, high on the volcano. The invitations tell the people when to come, because the date of the festival depends on the end of the rainy season. Each family saves a little rice to create an offering for the goddess, for the Pula Kirti, the origins of goodness. Women carry their offerings on their heads, and men may wear the ancient costumes of the Baris warrior dancers. Passing through their rice terraces, villages often bring their gamelan orchestras. Sheltered by umbrellas, sacred images of village gods join the procession that will welcome the goddess at the beginning of the new year. The gate to the temple represents the cosmic mountain at the center of the world. The offerings beside the entrance begin with rice stalks, and as they climb higher, represent the history of time itself. Inside the temple, there will be rituals to connect Swa, Bwa, and Bur, nature, spirit, and the human world. These connections are created by music, poetry, and prayers, but above all, by offerings made of flowers and other plants, which are shaped into cosmological symbols. To explore their meaning is to enter a world in which this temple is located at the center, where offerings show how time, color, music, gods, and humans are connected. Along with the goddess of the lake, the temple contains shrines for 44 gods and goddesses, like the rice goddess, Dewi Shri, and the earth goddess, Dewi Prtivi. The temple is located on the rim of the active volcano, Mount Batur, which contains an enormous crater lake. Because the lake is located inside the crater, it has no river outlets. The farmers believe that the crater lake is the home of the goddess of the lake. The waters of the crater lake seep through the earth and emerge as springs on the flanks of the volcano. The water is channeled into canals that irrigate the rice paddies. The flow of water must be carefully timed, flooding one block of terraces after the next. As it flows into the paddies, the water creates patterns that bring to mind the cyclical melodies of Balinese gamelan music. The processions arrive at the temple with their offerings. They're guided by the high priest, called the Jirogade. The Jiro was chosen by the goddess when he was 11 years old. In honor of the goddess, the men play the gamelan orchestra and dance the ancient warriors' dance called baris. Each movement is carefully choreographed, even the dancer's eyes. In a performance at the temple in 2011, a baris dancer told a story. In 1696, a famous Balinese king, Gusti Panji Sakti, asked the goddess of the lake to heal his wounds from battle and promised to hold a great ritual if he survived. The king recovered, but was later killed before he could fulfill his promise. 300 years later, in 2012, his descendants decided that it was time to fulfill the king's vow. With help from the temple priests and the villagers, the entire volcano was wrapped in 7 kilometers of white cloth, turning it into a sacred mandala. The temple priests cut the cord, representing the fulfillment of the king's promise. And the dancer who represented the king gave thanks. The Jiroga Day's prediction came true, as more than 40 village gamelan orchestras arrived to escort the goddess of the lake in her procession along the rim of the volcano. Each instrument in a Balinese gamelan plays a cyclical pattern of notes, and when all of the instruments come together in the full gamelan orchestra, they create complex rhythms and texture and melodies. Intriguingly, centuries ago, the Balinese created a calendar which works much the same way. In the West, we have a calendar which traces the progression of days in a 7-day week: Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. If we assign each of those days to a note, then we can play that calendar as a scale. Professor Made Bandam is a very famous Balinese professor of musicology and performer and musician. This is his gamelan, and we're going to be talking about the relationship between the calendar, the Uruku calendar, and gamelan music. So, just to say a word about the Uruku calendar, the Western calendar has only a 7-day week, but the Balinese calendar has many weeks. For example, there's a 2-day week, and the 2-day week consists of 2 days, Mange and Papat, which repeat. So if today is Mange, tomorrow is Papat, and the next day is Mange again. On the calendar, today were Sunday, it would be Sunday and Mange, and tomorrow would be Tuesday and Papat. This calendar has 10 different weeks, all of different sizes. For example, there's a 5-day week consisting of 5 days: Manis, Paing, Pong, Wagi, Kliwon, and Manis again. Now suppose each of the instruments is playing a cyclical pattern like that. They're all playing cyclical patterns. What might that sound like?
Let's play a piece called Bapang Selisit.
Wonderful, Bapang.
Perfect.
So
Sempurna.
Sempurna. Huh? So
Sempurna.
in the Lontar that you translated about Balinese music, I remember that it talks about the relationship between time,
Yeah.
the calendar, and music,
Yes.
but also colors and emotions.
It's nice.
How's that work?
Well, the colors will be colors and texture of the music. Of course, it goes into the cosmological colors also, different direction, different gods. Goddess has different colors. Take, for example, in the north we have God Vishnu. His colors are blue or black. In the east we have Ishwara, it's white colors. In the south that we have Brahma, it's red colors. In the west we have Mahadeva, we have yellow colors. And so on, go on like that for 9 directions of the cosmology, including one in the middle.
Oh.
There's a Shiva in the middle with Brumbun, all different colors in that case.
Fantastic. I see an offering right behind us. Could we pull it in?
Yeah.
Does this have any connection to what you're talking about?
Yes, always offering always have a connection with music, with dance. You know, before we perform, we always have a pray, and offering is one of the most important sarana, for the performance and for the music itself. Here also we have different colors of flowers. This is probably representing Brahma, and this is representing Mahadeva, and this is representing Shiva, and so on like this. It has to be all different colors in this offering to homage and to pray for the God. So when you learn anything about religion, about Balinese culture, you can actually learn through the offering itself, because it's representing the cosmology in Balinese worlds here in Bali.
Does it connect to music and days?
Yes,
as well?
of course, yeah, music and days.
How's that work?
Music and day, because music has, of course, we have 5-tone scale, and then we have 7-tone scale, as you mentioned earlier. When we speak about 7 days, like Radite, Somo, Angara, Buddha, Raspatis, Sukra, Sanichara, and also we have different colors in our cosmology, and follow with all of these things like that. So sounds also, because in the cosmological direction, we have 10 different sounds. Sa, ba, ta, a, I, nama, si, wa, ya. That becomes the tone of the Balinese gamelan. 5 of them becoming the tone of Pelong, and 5 of them becoming tone of the Selendro. It's called Panchatirtha for the Pelong, Panchagani for the Selendro. This is representing also the gods of love, Kama and Devi Rati. So the play gamelan, dance in Bali, it has to be related to real good spirit and love of doing it, love of devotion into God of Smara and Rati.
Right.
That's the symbol of
So
Balinese gamelan.
So beautifully complicated and amazingly sophisticated, this system of thought.
That's right, Pa.
The Balinese Uku calendar and their gamelan music both create harmony using interlocking cyclical patterns. But is this just a superficial resemblance? Could we translate the calendar into music by assigning notes in a pentatonic scale to the days of each of the 10 weeks and playing them concurrently like the days in the calendar? This is what it sounds like. In the West, it would be called color music.
Okay, Vibeke, Steve, are you still here? Let's see. Yeah. I tried to download Dreamtime again, so it doesn't work. It crashes again, and I would just want to see if Steve and Vibeke are still in the Zoom conference. I saw them recently while we showed the film. So let's give it a try, and then I try the last time to see if this file will work or it's corrupted. We cannot hear you. And the file doesn't work. So we have something to show on our next festival, or I want to inform you that now that we have established this platform, we want to work with this platform not only when we have the Beyond Festival every year, but we will make a couple of different presentations or talk rounds or lectures or workshops, and also offer it to the future design community, that we all can work together and share projects. And if you need some information or some help from somebody from China or from Singapore or from Zimbabwe or from Cuba, people can collaborate on our website. And we are still working on this, and also on the artificial intelligence for the live translation. I heard that it was sometimes quite weird, but we are an experimental festival. We try something out, and we are working on a version with our partners and at KIT and Stefan Stücker, who is working with this artificial intelligence. And I think the next time we will try to have 5 European languages and a Mandarin. And so, of course, it has to develop. We have to put a lot of effort, and whoever might be able to help on that. Also, to what we want to do in the future is that this artificial intelligence for translation will also get a voice, so that you don't have to read by the side, but then with your IP, people, we can see you come from Spain, and then you can hear a Spanish voice. So I want to say for the symposium now, bye-bye, and thanks a lot for my team. And we will be back at 5 with the film festival. The film festival will run today in the evening, and tomorrow, I think up to 5, we will have the ceremony of giving the prizes to the best films and the best talks. And we will have then a regional discussion about what we can do here in the Karlsruhe and in the Black Forest region locally. So the idea is think global, but act globally, act local. So thank you, and I hope I see you back at 5. Bye-bye.